Good morning and happy November 9th of 2025. So welcome to today's episode. And so this year this year. Oh, what a way to start up. This week we'll be talking about the year 1993 along with some games we'll discuss here in Relay of Gaming and also just touch some on modern gaming stuff too also. But hopefully everyone's had a great week. Um, Had a pretty decent week and all. A little bit of a fallout there towards the end at work where we upgraded to a new system, a new main core system, basically, and that we've all had been learning how to use on the go. So it's caused some headaches for myself and some of our coworkers, but I'm sure we'll get through. If anything, though, we had lunch bought for us and also some donuts, so yay. But yeah, no, so it'll be an interesting this week since this will be the first full week, right, where we're implementing this system. But it is a bit of a short week as I do have Tuesday off and also everything will be a little bit scattered, but such is the way it goes, excuse me, in the work life. But yeah, other than that, nothing too much going on. Been another fairly slow week. But hopefully this week we'll see what happens this week. I guess I don't have much to say on this week either. But we are ramping up here to, start the holiday thing. The holidays coming up here soon. So starting to look at my pay schedules and all that and see how I want to budget things out for Christmas and things like that. So that's always a fun time of the year. But it actually has been pretty fun now with kids. It's definitely one thing that you really start learning to reappreciate as Christmas. Because I went through like a phase where, obviously as a kid, I really loved Christmases. And then as I got into like a teenager and a young adult, I honestly don't recall a lot of Christmases. And I want to say that I think I was even a little bit bitter about it for some reason. But more recently, right, especially with kids and all, it definitely sort of reignites the magic of that holiday, right? It's just seeing their faces light up, right, when you give them something and all, or anybody else, right? And ultimately, the whole point of this, not only that holiday, but season, as we're going into Thanksgiving and everything, is just be thankful for, what you have, the people around you and all. And then, of course, leading into Christmas and all that, the joys of like, giving, right? And then just trying to light someone's face up, whether if it's with a present or good news or just, spending time with each other and all that. I mean, that's always a good thing. So definitely have learned to appreciate this time of the year more as I've gotten older. But it also means we're winding down 2025 and that just seems like it just flew right by. I mean, seriously, has been crazy, I'm sure, for a lot of people. And wow, it just really flew right by. I mean, 2020 especially, and I don't know if it's just, because I know I'm getting older, and so, I'm 45, and so, as you get older, time just does seem to fly by faster. But I hear this from a lot of people, even younger people, that, ever since 2020, things have just like really sped on by. And so it's definitely been challenging for a lot of people for many different reasons. As we enter into this holiday season, I think the main thing that we should remember is that appreciate the things that you do have, the people around you, and the good stuff in life, because there's still a lot of that stuff. A lot of the stuff that is negative out there is, we don't have any control over. But some of the stuff we do have control, and that is, ultimately how we respond to things and what we choose to put our energy into as well. And so I know for myself, and I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I've been really trying to just sort of channel my energy in ways that it's, things that just bring me a little bit more joy, right? So for example, family and, things like that. And then also trying to stay away from like social media and those kind of things as much as possible. I mean, I've been sort of using social media a bit as I'm trying to get this podcast thing going. But as far as for like just doom scrolling, for example, and all, I think I talked about it last episode or somewhere along the lines. I've talked about it recently, where I'm trying to get back into like instead of doom scrolling and all, just if I'm just relaxing, hanging out and all, pick up a retro video game console, right, and just play a game for a bit. At least that way I'm engaged in something that is more um, fulfilling, I guess you can say, right? Instead of just doom scrolling, and then before you know it, you're up to your knees in just a bunch of stuff, right? That's probably not very good for you. Um, but that's my goal anyways and all. Like I've been trying to watch instead of just watching just random stuff also on YouTube. Also been trying to go back to like watching movies and listening to music and things like that. Even I'm gonna start trying to pick up like just reading books again and all, and just go back to the old ways, right? But for movies, I recently saw again one of my all-time favorites, Blade Runner, and I can't get over just how much of a great movie that is, and just so many different hidden themes and how you can explore the plot of that movie and all. And I love that kind of stuff for me personally, where, I mean, I like a story that kind of spells things out for you as long as it's done well, but I also like a story too, also that it kind of leaves you guessing on a lot of things if it's also done well too. And Blade Runner is definitely one of my favorite movies for that. There, just great all around. Great directing from Ridley Scott and performances from Harrison Ford, Sean Young, Edward James Olmos, and Rutger Hauer. His classic line about "I see things you people wouldn't believe." It's just so beautiful, and yeah, just a great movie. But anyways, enough of that there. Let's get on into gaming stuff here. So we're going to do another round here for a Relay of Gaming. I put a few new videos up on my YouTube there for some games that I picked after the 3 that I picked last week. And yeah, so I've been having fun with that and all. Just, again, it's just a way that I can sort of experience games without having to actually dedicate time to sit down and play them and all that, when my time is limited now. And but still kind of gives me that fix, I guess you can say. And also just expanding my own video game knowledges. I'll do like just really quick research as I'm writing something about a game, if it's a game that I'm not too familiar with. But yeah, let's go ahead and start off with this week here. And so I've added a few more games too also. So let's go ahead and see what the first pick is here. $459. What does that bring? F-Zero GX. Alrighty. Okay, and let's see. Let's go for the next one. $563. Ah, yeah, that's gonna be Hollow Knight. Okay. So if you've been listening to any of this my little podcasting here that I've been doing, I've already kind of talked a lot about this game, but sure, yeah, I'll love to talk about it again too. But yeah, I'll get into that here in a bit. All right, and let's go with the last one. 1,092. And that's going to leave me with Sonic Advance. Okay. Good choices. All right, so let's kind of start talking about these here. So F-Zero GX. So this one I have some experience with. Recently it came out on the NSO for the on the GameCube, or on the GameCube. Oh my God, the Nintendo Switch, but on the GameCube Nintendo Switch line app that it has on there. So F-Zero GX, it was the well, because there was a let's see, so there was a F-Zero on the Super Nintendo, and then F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64, and those were pretty popular on there. And then, but then we went into the sixth generation where Nintendo system was the GameCube, and on the GameCube they had this game F-Zero GX. And there was some Game Boy Advance games. I don't know if there was anything on the Game Boy, but there was some Game Boy Advance games. But if it's not the third one, it would have been the third console one, because there was excuse me, there was the two Game Boy Advance ones. But I think maybe those came out after F-Zero GX. But anyways, so F-Zero GX, it came out in 2003. But this one here, so I want to say that, let's see, I could get some of my facts wrong, but so Sega had started venturing out to develop for other consoles at this time, because this F-Zero GX, so it came out in 2003. So Sega had announced that they were bowing out of the console race in early 2001. So they started porting some of their games on other platforms, but they were also helping develop games too also. So for example, this one. So they helped, along with Nintendo, Sega, help develop this game. And I think actually I could be wrong, but I think they were like the main developer actually. So it's more of a Sega made game, right, than a Nintendo game. If I understand correctly, because where I'm not quite sure, there was I think some kind of an arcade version of this game. And I don't know if that came out first and then this was sort of like a port of it or vice versa. But either way, Sega had a hand in both of them there. And so F-Zero GX, I mean, it definitely feels like an F-Zero game, though. It's, I mean, for me personally, it was a game that I used to love showing off back then, because it's a really good looking game. It's one of the best looking games of that generation, I feel. And so back then I bought a setup within my budget, right, and all that I had at the time, but I felt that it was a pretty good setup where I can show off like the video game graphics at the time and sound and all, because I've always been kind of about that. I just kind of a geek when it comes to that stuff. Again, I'm not like a complete graphic nut where I need the best and best, but I do tend to like that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is just because I just appreciate the visuals and all that of video games and whatnot, and I like to show it off as much as possible or experience it as much as possible. So back then I had like a widescreen TV, which was I mean, they were starting to become the norm on it and all, but it was a CRT TV that could do progressive scan. And so F-Zero supported that progressive scan and widescreen. And then also it didn't have Dolby Digital because the GameCube couldn't output like that, but it had Dolby Surround Pro Logic 2. And so it was a game because I used to like having at least one or two games on each of those sixth generation consoles that I could show off. And F-Zero GX was one of them that I had for the Nintendo GameCube at the time for that. And it's a hella fast game. I mean, it is ridiculously fast sometimes and hard to control sometimes too also, but it is still hella fun though. And I do have fun with this game. Like I said, if anything, even if I'm crashing and burning a lot and all, I just like going through it just because of the really fast speed. It is fun still to play. And, again, it's got cool graphics, sound and all that. And F-Zero has a certain feel to it and all that is pretty cool. And I mean, I much prefer the Wipeout series, me personally, when it comes to like these kind of hovercraft futuristic racing games. But F-Zero's cool. I can understand the appeal to it and all, and why a lot of Nintendo diehard fans and all are still hoping for another sequel at some point, which would be cool. But we did get this recently though on the Nintendo Switch Online, and so I think that's where I'm going to play it in when I record a little bit of footage for it here on the my little YouTube short things. But I have heard, though, I haven't really messed around with it too much, but unfortunately I have heard that the port that was done on the Nintendo Switch Online is a bit laggy, which is unfortunate because this is a game where you really need to dial in your controls, because you're going to be making a lot of really sharp turns and last second decisions and all. And so I guess, like I said, I haven't really played around with it too much. So maybe when I play it a little bit later today to get footage for it, we'll see how bad it is, I guess. But the original game, right, not counting the port of it, how it was done and all, it's really good and definitely worth a look. Kind of wish they would have remade it on its own, and maybe, this is wishful thinking, right? But remake the GameCube game, clean it up a bit and all that, no lag on the controls and everything, and sell it for like $20. Yeah, but now, obviously that's not going to happen. So, they did port it over to the Nintendo Switch Online, but, seems like it's not the best port, but at least we got something. But I'll be checking that out then. Excuse me. And so, yeah, so F-Zero GX, good game. But then we go into Hollow Knight. So Hollow Knight, this game came out, I believe, in 2017. And so if you go back and listen to the previous episodes, pretty much all throughout like the months of September, Hollow Knight was my game. I had tried playing it before. I think I got it somewhat close to after it came out back then. I just remember hearing a lot of good things about it. So I was like, sure, I'll buy it. Tried it out because I'm a big fan of Metroidvanias. Tried it out. Didn't really get into it. I was like, oh, this is kind of hard. It's kind of, I don't know. It just didn't really click with me. But I kept hearing about it, that it was like one of the best games of all time. And then with Silk Song coming out too also, it was finally like around in August or so of this year that I was like, okay, let's start giving this game a shot. And so started getting into it. And then really in September is where I really got into it. And it was... had a lot going on in September this year, and then also just a lot of things going on in the world and all that. It was the perfect game for me to play to get my mind off of a lot of things, because it's sometimes to go through challenging times, you need to challenge yourself on certain things, right? And that could be like a lot of different things. For example, like challenge yourself to learning a new skill, or I don't know, maybe going to school or working out, getting yourself in shape, where you're kind of pushing yourself a bit to challenge yourself. Or also, playing something like Hollow Knight. Now, obviously, the other things are going to be a lot more rewarding, right, than, say, playing Hollow Knight. But, at the time, it's really, I couldn't really do much more except, to challenge myself in that way. So figured a challenging video game would be it. And so, again, I played Hollow Knight through most of September, and I ended up beating it, I think, on the last day of September. And, well, I beat it. I didn't get the best ending, but I beat it. I beat the last boss on it. Well, one of the last bosses. And, yeah, it's just an absolutely amazing game. Just to kind of reiterate a little bit of what I've already talked about this game. Part of the reason why I love it so much is just because it's a game that you can absolutely get lost in and all. But that is such a rewarding feeling, though, when you're going through it. Because some games do it really right, where it's not only getting lost in it and all, but it's giving you enough visual feedback, gameplay feedback, music feedback, and all that. You're appreciating inhabiting this world because it is such a creative, mysterious world and all. And then the story is a little bit vague also too. But that's kind of the part of the appeal of the game, is that you are getting lost in this world and all. And it is such a beauty to it that part of the reason why, at least for me, why I liked playing video games back then when I was a kid, was because it was almost like a virtual sandbox that I could just get lost in and play over and over and over. And eventually to the point where I really got to know the level layouts really well and all that. And eventually where I started feeling like becoming like a master of the game. And that's what this game really brought back memories from, was those old games back then from, like, for example, the original Metroid, Foxanadu, Wizards and Warriors and all, and just getting lost in these worlds and all, trying to figure out their puzzles or level layouts and whatnot, and finding new items. And I can see why Hollow Knight is one of the best Metroidvanias of all time, because everything is done with purpose. Every power-up that you get, every collectible that you get and all, it feels like you're making progress going forward to making you not only a more powerful player, but also, as you're going through these tough levels, just a more skilled player. That when you finally beat one of the bosses, which are some of the funnest I've ever played in a video game, it's just a very rewarding feeling. And yeah, Hollow Knight is such a great game. I feel like I'm almost out of words of talking about it, just because I've talked about it already so much. But it's just definitely an all-time classic for me, and it's one game that one of the more modern gaming experiences that I've had that I'll truly cherish, and I'll never forget my time with it. And just a magical game. And I mean, I've been kind of going through Silk Song a little bit. I'm only like about an hour and a half into it and all, and that game's great too also. But I don't know if it'll capture the same magic, honestly, as the first one did. Like I said, I fear a lot of people talk about that Silksong's much better, but it's also much harder. So I don't know. Whatever the case is with Silksong, if I end up going through it and beat it and all, I still feel that this experience that I had with the original one, Hollow Knight, was still really magical and definitely will still be one of my favorite games of all time. I think I ranked it like around in my top 30 or so after I beat it. I just ended up liking it so much. Not my favorite Metroidvania game, but it's definitely one that I really enjoyed. My third favorite Metroidvania game, actually, but the top two are pretty legendary for me. But I can see why this game is really special for a lot of people. And yeah, Hollow Knight is amazing, truly amazing game. But then on the next one, so we have Sonic Advance. And Sonic Advance, I played a little bit of it. I had the Game Boy Advance back in the day, but I never really bought. It's kind of funny because I mean I had all the consoles back then in the sixth generation, so the Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. But for some reason, and it wasn't like out of spite or anything like that. It was just I had a hard time trying to buy a Sega game on another console, just because I just felt that Sega games belonged on a Sega console. Eventually, what ended up happening was as much whichever games were available on all of them, I would get them on the Xbox, just because for some reason I just associated the Xbox as the next successor for Sega. And in a weird way, it kind of was, because the Xbox was, it kind of felt like a Dreamcast point two in some ways. But anyways, so the Sonic games, I had a hard time trying to get them on the Nintendo, and I just felt like for some reason I just thought that they wouldn't be as good. But now I'm older and just don't give a shit about hardly anything nowadays when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I've messed around with the first Sonic Advance game on emulation. I think I've gone to like the third world or so, and so I'll pick up and play it here, to play for this, this week's part of this week's YouTube shorts that I'll do. And it's fun. I mean, what I played of it is fun. The level layouts seem pretty cool and all. It's, within the same vein as like the Genesis games. They just have a bit of a different look to them. But it's cool. I like the look though. Like I really like Sonic's animations and look to him. I mean, I prefer him over like what he looked on the Genesis. And it's, they seem like good games. I've never really heard anything bad about these games. But I've never really heard anything much about these games either. So Sonic is weird because I know it's popular. I know it's popular. And it definitely has its fandom, and it seems like the fandom can be a little intense sometimes because they just love these games so much. But I don't feel like I still really hear much about it. These Sonic games, though, past the Genesis games. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. And then again, I'm not involved with like a lot of like online gaming community sites and all that. So maybe there's a part of that I'm completely missing now. But yeah, but I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, they seem like good games, and so this will be a good chance to check one out. But Sonic Advance and Hollow Knight and F-Zero GX, so interesting little selection of games there that I'll be happy to check out here. But let's get into some gaming news. So modern gaming stuff, anyways. So I wrote a few things down for this overall podcast, right? So for modern gaming stuff, and then also what I'll talk about for stuff from 1993. So this may be a little lengthy. I don't know. We'll see. I'm already 23 minutes. Okay. But so starting off with some of the stuff that happened this week or was announced. So some of the stuff is stuff that was announced and all that, or other stuff is just things that still have to do with somewhat with gaming news. But we'll start off here with Nintendo. They released their figures for their Switch 2 sales figures, and it sold pretty well. It sold really well, actually, as a matter of fact. Let's see, I probably should have been a little bit more prepared for this here, but my understanding is that it... yeah, okay, yeah, so here, I just clicked on a quick story here on this. So just a quick headline here from, looks like on November 6th, so a few days ago. So the Nintendo Switch 2 will overtake the Wii U's lifetime sales sooner than anyone thought. That's crazy. But Yeah, so it looks like I mean it's already approaching like I think like 10 million or so. I think is what it sold. And and again that's just from when it came out in what just earlier this year in June. Um so it's pretty crazy that it's already selling that much. And I mean it's let's see, I'm trying to find like a I can't. I probably should have been a little bit more prepared on this one here, but well, we're going off the cuff here. But yeah, I want to say like I think it sold like about 10 million or so, give or take. And so it seems like it's becoming, if it's not the fastest selling system of all time, it's definitely up there. And like I said, because the Wii U sold what, like I want to guesstimate like around 13 million or so. Uh, and so the Switch 2 is already at 10 million. I mean, that's pretty nuts that it already sold that much. And they also updated the sales figures for the Nintendo Switch, the original one, which was like a 154 million point one or something like that. And I saw something that the Nintendo DS sold like 154 million point two. So and then the sales figures came out from, they're not like up like today's sales figures, right? They would have been from like a few weeks ago when they finally released them. So it could very well be that as of right now, the Nintendo Switch finally beat the Nintendo DS as far as sales figures, which means that it would be the second best selling system of all time, right behind the PlayStation. Because the PlayStation originally sold 155 million, but then Sony somehow magically found some 5 million more units. And so now their official sales figure number is 160 million. So will it beat it? Who knows? We'll see. But the Switch 2, yeah. So it's been selling like crazy, and so let's say if it's around 10 million or so that it's sold, and the Switch 2 has had a negative, lot of negative reception towards it. And a lot of it is understandable, right? And all we've talked about it a little bit before here, where as far as like um, the game key cards, the prices of the games, steering away, trying to get us into more of a digital ecosystem, and where Nintendo's always been a bit more of the more consumer and family friendly company and all. But even with all that, though, it still ended up selling quite a bit of units here. So, I mean, what does that mean, right? Well, I mean, it just means Nintendo's doing pretty good still. And, you know, I mean, it's like, I understand from both sides of it and all, and ultimately, if it was up to me, right? If I had all the money in the world and all that, and to try to piece to everyone, is that physical media would still continue on, because I understand the importance of it. That you can have the physical media, you can pop it in your console, and it'll continue working where you don't need the access to the internet. But at the same time, though, and I'm not for this, but the reality is that everything's going digital. Everything's moving in that direction there. And how much fight back can we do against it? And I mean, by all means, vote with your wallet and all. That's, ultimately you are in control of what you buy. But at the end of the day, the corporations and all, they're going to do what they're going to do. And because a lot of it is also just how they're seeing the market, right? Because a lot of times we kind of get stuck in a sort of like in a bubble, right? And all, where we're communicating with people and all that we feel like we all think the same. So for example, physical media should be the thing and all going forward, but we're not looking at the overall mass market. And pretty much like just the casual person that I know and all, right, that is just not really into video games. But and this is not just with video games, movies or music and all that, everything's just going digital. That's how everybody prefers things nowadays. And I mean, I do feel that we all kind of got suckered into going into that direction, right? Because nobody, unless you're really up to date on this kind of stuff, right, nobody's really paying attention that, oh, will I still have access to this, in the next 10 years and all, or maybe they don't even care. And that's the thing, right? A lot of people have been conditioned that way. And it's sad. I acknowledge that. It's sad. But that's just the reality of where things are going nowadays. And, I mean, what do you do, right? I mean, Sure, you can continue buying, physical media as much as you can and all that, but how much of an impact will that overall make, right? I just, we're going down in this direction. I don't see things changing, and I say that unfortunately, but it's just the times are changing. Everything is changing nowadays, and and honestly, I mean, all of this is kind of part of the reasons why and all, right? Where I'm just trying to go back more to previous years as far as my enjoyment of video games and all, and not so much the latest and greatest because of just some of these practices and all that, right? But like I will say for me personally, and I'm kind of all over the place with what I'm talking about here, but basically, there is definitely a benefit to having games digitally, for example, where it's not cluttering up your space and all that, because that's a big thing too, right there. Unfortunately, right? It's because this is not like it's a completely healthy thing, although I do feel that gaming can be healthy in a lot of ways, but it's not a completely healthy thing and all that, right? And not to be spending a lot of money and having a huge library of games and all that. You have like you know, um, your walls filled with just a bunch of game collections and all with or shelves, shelves that you have, with video games on them and all, like physical media and all, because it takes up a lot of room, right? And unfortunately, as gamers, we like to have a big collection of games, whether if it's things that we have on our digital libraries or a bunch of physical media or physical actual cartridges and discs and all that. And so, we need the space to store them at. Like, I know for me personally, that would be kind of a big issue if I did try to do that, just because, I mean, yes, I could make room for it. But, it would take up a lot of space. And so what I am trying to do here soon, and this is something I'm going to be doing very little by little, is like, so maybe some of like my top 50 games or so, right? I would want them in some sort of physical collection. But anything past that, I don't know, it is just much more convenient to have them digitally. But understanding though, right, and all of the potential risks of that, as far as the games not being available on their service, for years to come, and it's just, I don't know, it's kind of a weird position, right, with this kind of stuff here, as things are just changing, and these companies are like trying to brute force their way through it, and I mean, what can we do, right? I mean, it's going to happen. But either way, I mean, you do you. I mean, you do what you feel you need to do, and you vote with your wallet on what you feel is important to you. But anyway, that's only one part of the issues, right, with Nintendo Switch 2 that they've had, along with other things too also. But anyway, regarding all that though, right, obviously it's still selling really well, and I think it just kind of shows that the Nintendo brand is pretty huge. I mean, again, us gamers, we can have a lot of issues with Nintendo themselves, and rightly so, with a lot of their practices that they do. But just a casual person, they're not really paying attention to none of that stuff. Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, and all the party games that they have, Mario Kart and all, that's still huge with a lot of people, and that's what they're going to buy when it comes to video games. And it's so their name still holds a lot of weight, which I still feel I mean, as much as there's a lot of things about Nintendo that I disagree with, Nintendo still makes quality games, and they still make gamer games, right? That they're meant specifically just to have fun. And for that, it's like, I hate what you guys do a lot of times, but you guys still make these games that, appeal to a lot of people. And so for that, I guess, they should reserve, or not should, but they can reserve some recognition still, right? And probably why they sold as many units as they did. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not, I'm not like a Nintendo hater completely. I mean, I hate a lot of their business practices, but I love their games. But I'm also not like a Nintendo defender or whatever. And so, I mean, when I see a figure, that right there, that they sold that many, I mean, it is what it is. Nintendo's still in the game, and even if they're kind of shady in the way they do it and all, but I mean, they're still around, and looks like they're still going to be around for a while. Because it looks like they're ramping up their movie businesses too, also. Because like The Legend of Zelda started filming in New Zealand, they got the Mario movie that came out, Mario Galaxy, the Mario Brothers Galaxy movie coming out next year, the Zelda movie in 2027, some kind of a Donkey Kong movie I think I've heard that's getting made. So I mean, they're really going in that direction too, and then also with their theme parks and all. So, I mean, it seems like for better or worse, Nintendo's going to be here for a while. And I say this very reluctantly, but that's good though. That I still feel that is good for as far as just gaming overall. Obviously, not their practices and all. But if I'm just talking strictly like the games and all. But anyways, kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there on that. But yeah, Nintendo Switch 2 sales figures. So something else though that I read. I don't know how recent this was, but I just read it last week that I thought was kind of cool. Is that someone, I think like some kind of a modding team or community that does mods and such, they recreated the Xbox prototype X model. So for those that don't know, going back to I think this would have been in the year 2000, Xbox revealed a prototype to the public, what their plan was, right, which eventually would become the Xbox. And so it was basically like like an X, and it was fairly big too, and it was made of like, I don't know, some kind of metal or so, because it was like a shiny silver, and it then it had like the green light in the middle. So if you look at the original Xbox console, so it's all black, right, and it's like a square shape, you can say, or slightly a rectangle or whatever it is. But basically on the console itself, it has the X design only on the indentions on the side and on the top, right? And all there's like, obviously like plastic that fills in those gaps there. So it doesn't look all like completely like an X. Well, basically what this Xbox is that it is just an X, right? It's like and it was a working prototype back then. From what I recall, I think I heard back then that when they had a hard time piecing this together, and I think it didn't work right away or something like that, when they were trying to show off the prototype demos that they had back in 2000. But everyone just thought it was kind of unique, because I'm sure that they probably wanted something that really stood out, right? Because they're going up against PlayStation and Nintendo and all, so they wanted something that was going to stand out. And so anyways, that was kind of popular back then, as far as, that the prototype that they unveiled, just because it looks so ridiculous, but kind of cool. But looks like somehow somebody got an Xbox prototype X model set up. I don't know if it actually works, like it has like all the computer components inside and all, but I think it did though. But anyways, like I said, I just saw a quick headline on that, and I thought that was kind of interesting. So that's cool that they did that. Let's see, another metagaming stuff. So I thought this was cool. And so a few months ago, so this year, there was a game that came out, and it caught my interest just because I hadn't heard that this game was coming out. And I saw a trailer to it. I was like, oh, that actually looks kind of interesting. It's a new IP from a fairly small developer, and it looked kind of cool though. And the gameplay looked kind of cool. The graphics looked cool. It looked original and all. And it was this game called Echoes of the End. And so I when it came out, I think it was on sale. So I purchased the game. I was like, I'll check this game out at some point. Every now and then, if I hear something cool about a game and all, and it seems like something I might like, but it's not that well known, every now and then I'll purchase it, right? And I'll just try to give like some of these smaller indie developers, to try to support them and all. But it looked interesting, but I haven't really gotten around to playing it yet, though. I was like, oh, I'll try to get to it here at some point. Well, recently I just somehow came across a trailer of the developers, and they released like this enhanced edition where looks like they buttoned up a lot of things on it. They listened to a bunch of fan feedback and changed some things or improved on some things and all. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. That they went back and fixed a bunch of issues that the game had. Because it looks like the game was fairly well received, but they took it to heart, right, and all on so a lot of consumer feedback. And so the coolest thing about this is that one of the coolest things about it is that it's all free. So this update that they did on it's all free. So that's you're not probably going to see that very much going forward. These kind of things that developers will do, right? That is a very consumer friendly move. But the fact that they did it, I think definitely deserves a bit of a spotlight on it. And so, like the other day, I booted up my Xbox, and so it did the upgrades on, when it does all its updates. And so now on that one, I noticed there that on the thumbnail on it that I have on my, digital library there on the Xbox, is that now it says on their enhanced edition. So very cool, right? I think it's something that should always be applauded whenever a developer does something like this. I mean, aside from the greediness of a lot of corporations and all that, I can also imagine that it's probably not the easiest thing to do to go back and use your resources and time and manpower and all, right, to try to fix a bunch of stuff in a game. I mean, I think most companies maybe just try to fix a few bugs and then call it good and move on, because, realistically, right now, if you work for pretty much any company, there's only so much that they can do, right, as far as with their time, money, and resources and things like that. And so I think they just a lot of times it's just kind of prioritizing what they need to do with all that, which is unfortunate because a lot of times they'll rush out a game and it's all broken mess and all. And again, that's another problem with modern gaming, but. Again, just things I've already talked about. But anyway, when a developer does actually do something like this, I feel like it's something that should definitely be celebrated. And I thought that was kind of cool. So maybe I'll start trying to give this game a go here, sooner rather than later. For those that don't know, Echoes of the End. So it came out on the Xbox and the PlayStation, and I want to say maybe PC. I'm not sure. I don't think it came out on the Switch, but I'm not sure. But it basically, you play this, it's like a female warrior of some sort, and it has sort of like a Viking sort of setting to it. But it looks like you have like magic powers. It kind of seems like it plays a little bit of like Dark Souls, but not quite Dark Souls. But that's sort of like third person action, hack and slash with adventure elements to it. But look up a trailer if you've never seen it before. It looks interesting. Like I said, it caught my interest and all. But anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. So another thing that I thought was kind of cool too, also, I don't know when exactly this happened, but it was a video that I came across that, uh, so if you've been listening to anything I've been saying in these past several podcasts, I'm a bit of a Final Fantasy VII nerd. And so really waiting for the Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, whatever they choose to call it. And so I've, ever since that came out, with a remake and then rebirth and and then the news that we're getting on this third one. So I've geeked over a lot of the different videos as far as like the making of a lot of retrospective stuff, lore and whatnot. And one of the things that I really like about the game, and then also that I like seeing videos of the cast, is the voice actors. As they talk about their performances and just their thoughts on the game and all that. Um, and so, because it has a really great cast of voice actors, so there's Cody Christensen, I think that's his last name, that does Cloud, which is he's perfect as Cloud. Brianna White is Aerith. I mean, she's adorable in that role. Oh, I forget her name. Brianna, I think. I forgot the actress's name, but she's amazing as Tifa. And then, God, I'm, for being such a fan, I forget a lot of their names, but the actor that does the role for Barrett too, I mean, he's great in that too. Also, Matt Mercer as Vincent, the dude that plays Red 13, the girl that plays, Yuffie, all of them are amazing, right? And all. And because I really like the voice acting in that game, I feel like they really nailed it, and it gives their performances outside of like also the writing, obviously that the writers did on these cast of characters did a really good job, but it just made them feel very relatable, and along outside of just their raw acting talents, they really felt like that it made you care for the characters, right? And a lot of it had to do because of their performances. So all across the board and all, the game has amazing acting. But one thing that they haven't really gave a lot of information on is on the voice actor for Sephiroth. And because, he's a fairly big name in acting. I mean, not a huge name and all, but he's fairly well known. And the actor is Tyler Hoechlin, I believe is how you say his last name. But so when he was announced that he was going to play Sephiroth, it's like, oh, that's the dude from that plays Superman in the started off on the CW Superman and Lois show, which I heard is amazing. I need to watch that show. But so he's somewhat popular, And so when he got to play Sephiroth, I was like, well, that's kind of a interesting actor. I was like, because the whole time I was like, I guess I haven't really paid attention to his voice on how he would sound as Sephiroth and why he would be chosen for that. But then, when I played the game and all, remake and rebirth, yeah, he's excellent as Sephiroth. But you haven't really heard anything about that, his performance on it, because you hear a lot from the other voice actors. Well, not so much Cody Christensen, but because again, and a lot of it just probably has to do because of their schedules and all that. That some of these actors they're just kind of busy, right, and all with other projects that they do. But at least Cody Christensen, you have seen him out there on some video game conventions and whatnot, and he's out there with the rest of the cast. But Tyler Hoechlin, you never hear anything about him. So, anyways, there was what was it called? GalaxyCon, I think. And so I saw a video of somebody reacting to this where he was at this GalaxyCon, and I don't know when this happened. I'm not familiar with that convention, but he was there just taking questions, right, from just random things. And some this lady came up and she asked him, "Hey, can you talk a bit about how you fell into the role of Sephiroth?" And so I thought that was cool that she asked that, because she must have been thinking like, hey, we really don't know much, right? I mean, it'd be kind of cool to, just hear it from the actor himself. And so he provided some feedback on that. And, and again, that was a cool thing for the fans and all, right? That we got to hear some information on his performance on Sephiroth. And basically what he said, more or less, is that he just kind of fell into it, literally, where he got called in, I think he said, to do like do some voice work for a game for Square and something like that. And so he read a few lines and then, okay, cool. Never thought much of it. And then like about a year later, he got the call that he got the role. And that was pretty much it. And it looks like he was doing that in between while he was doing like the Superman and Lois. I think I could be wrong, but I think he said something like on the weekends or so when he wasn't shooting the show that he was he would just do some lines for the remake and rebirth. But he definitely didn't phone it in, right? I mean, he's excellent as Sephiroth, I think. And so anyways, he there wasn't really much to tell as far as how he got the role and everything. He literally just said, I just kind of fell into it. But it was still, like I said, it was kind of cool because we really haven't heard that much about it. So at least we had that little snippet there of his take on it, which is cool. And he was very humble about it and very respectful to the lady that asked the question, because she seemed like she was a big fan of it. And also it was cool how he answered her question respectfully. And it looks like, because he started to say something like, yeah, people have been telling me like, hey, dude, like you're playing one of the greatest villains of all time. And so he's like, oh crap. And so he's been learning more about the character, I guess, by going to conventions and all, and hearing fans come up to him and talk to him about it. And so now with all that, right, I'm really excited to see what he's going to do on this third one, because I'm going to assume he's going to have a pretty big role in it, given what happens and what we know of the original game, right? And then whatever else they choose to do with it. But yeah, I just thought that was cool. And I'm glad that she was able to ask him that question. But one of the bigger news is, though, that did come out as far as video game stuff related for modern stuff is this is actually pretty cool. So for PlayStation Portal owners, so the PlayStation Portal, it's a bit, it's a cool device. I like it. And my microphone kind of fell over. But I like it in theory where, it's this device that you can have where you're playing your games portably, right? Like on your PlayStation, but it's all being streamed, right? So like it started off where it's just like remote play, where you have to have your PlayStation 5 turned on and so that you can remote play to it. Now, if you are somewhere else, but as long as it has Wi-Fi and as long as your PlayStation 5 at home is turned on, you can still play it that way. But it seemed a little bit limiting, and also the fact that it's streaming the game, right? It's not playing it natively, but it still felt like a good companion, and it wasn't too expensive, and it is advertised as that, right? It's the PlayStation Portal, so it's like a portal, so to speak, right? And another way that you can play your PlayStation games. But again, it was just limited that you had to have your PlayStation 5 turned on. Well, since it came out in when did it come out? 2023, I think. But so it's been out for a bit. And so since then, though, it's had a bunch of updates on it. And just recently, this past week, it had probably its biggest update. So I messed around with it a little bit. So this is kind of what I understand about it. So previously, some months back, maybe almost a year ago, they did release like a beta version where now you can, as long as you have a PlayStation 5 or the PlayStation Plus subscription, you can play games without the PlayStation 5 being turned on. And so when you turn on the portal, you get the option to select if you want to remote play into your system or you want to do cloud streaming. So if you select that option, it gave you like a list of some games that you can play on there. And it had a decent selection. Some stuff from like the PlayStation, even like if you have the PlayStation Plus premium subscription, some of the games you can play on there. But not a whole lot, but still it was, it was kind of cool, but it was all in beta there still. So recently, what happened was that they expanded upon that, where you can play a lot more games now without the need of the PlayStation 5. And so I tested it out the other night, and yeah, I mean it is kind of cool now because yeah, so I had my PlayStation 5 turned off, and so but I did this update, and so now it gives me the option if I want to stream games that I own or stream games from like the PlayStation Plus overall membership. And so it has a decent amount of games now that I can stream on the portal without turning on my PlayStation. I mean, a lot of games that I would play, like it has, the two Final Fantasy VII remake and rebirth. It had like God of War, I think Ghost of Yote, Tekken 3, the one that just came out on the PlayStation Plus Premium, and several games. I was just kind of going through it really quick, right? And I was like, oh wow, I was like, it actually has a decent amount of games that I would want to play that are in my library. And then but then if you can also go to like the games on the PlayStation Plus if you have the premium subscription, and it has quite a bit of games on there too, also. So it's pretty cool. I mean, you have a pretty big selection of games that you can play now, the games that are maybe already in your library or games from the subscription. And again, without the need of turning on the PlayStation 5. And I could be wrong, but I want to say I think I heard too also that you can now buy games from the portal, right? And then without having to turn on your PlayStation 5. I could be wrong on that, or maybe something that they wanted to implement. Like I said, I just checked it out really quick and all, but yeah, it's kind of cool now. So, I mean, maybe something that would entice you more to buy it if we were kind of in the market for it and all. But it still comes down to two things though. First of all, again, you're just streaming the game. So a lot of it is dependent on your internet connection. So for me here at my house, I don't have a big house, but like if I'm in the living room and all, and if I'm in one room, it seems to be okay. But then if I'm in another room, I get like this dead zone where it drops like a bar, which is not too bad if I'm just doing like very basic internet stuff, like, um, like watching a YouTube video or something like that. But when it comes to streaming games, I do get a lot of lag and then the fuzzy picture on it. And also, so yeah, and unfortunately that room is kind of one of the rooms that I would normally use where I would want to use a PlayStation Portal. I've tried things from like moving my router around and all, plugging in directly to an Ethernet cable to the PlayStation 5, getting an extender and all, and none of it seems to work. So I don't know what it is about this room. I just have a bit of a dead zone in there, I guess. Well, not a dead zone, because again, I do get internet in there, but it's bad enough where, again, it just doesn't play the portal well. So that's kind of like the frustrating thing for me personally, right, on how I use it. But when it works well, it works pretty well. So like the other day, I was just sleeping in the living room there, and as I'm trying to get we're uh, my daughter trying to get her sleep trained and all that, but and so sleeping in the living room and all, just in case she came out. And also I had the PlayStation Portal there when I was using it there in the living room, and the router's like right next there and all, and it was working great. I mean, I was playing a bit of a Ghost of Tsushima on there, and it played really well. I mean, it's you couldn't, every now and then I would notice a little stutter, but not too bad though. So for what it is, right? I know it's a good device, I can say, if you have a decent internet connection and you don't mind little stutters here and there and all that, right? And because again, it's not playing the game natively. But anyways, thought I'd provide some of that feedback there for anybody that might be interested. For me personally, it's worth it. But again, because a lot of I love having like a hybrid combination of how I can play my games, right? Which is why I love the Switch and all, and then why I like this as well too, also because it gives me that ability to play, the games portably. Um, but yeah, so that's one of the bigger news that happened this past week on video gaming, but probably the biggest one though. No, I should say the biggest news that did come out is the delay of Grand Theft Auto 6. I think a lot of people were already predicting this, and this is going to happen. So originally it was going to come out in May of 2026. I forgot the exact date, but it was going to be released in May. But a lot of people kind of had the feeling that it was going to get pushed out. Well, it did, and now it's coming out. I think they said November 19th of 2026, so just a little over a year from today's date of this recording. And yeah, I mean, I for me personally, I do enjoy the Grand Theft Auto games. I've had a lot of fun with them, but I'm not like the biggest fan of him and all, and then I don't play it online. Like I know Grand Theft Auto 5, one of the main reasons it's been kept so relevant is because of its online component. Which again, I don't mess around with that there. So I don't really miss out on that for me personally. But I guess what does sort of suck about it is how that impacts a lot of other companies as far as when they can release their games and all that. And I mean, I'm sure that's kind of a bit of a nightmare for some companies, right? Because I can imagine, like, if once Rockstar announced that they're coming out with their game in May, they're like, okay, cool, so maybe I'll release my game around that. And so let's say they pushed that out until the fall season, let's say November, and now it's like, oh crap, now it's going to release in November. And it's just unfortunate because even if you have like a really good game, because I've seen this happen before with, in other scenarios where a game that came out was really popular, but nowhere near the popularity of Grand Theft Auto 6, and they still unfortunately ate up a lot of the sales that another game would have had, because again, I mean, for better or worse, that matters, right? As far as like when you release your game, because of other games that are on the market, gamers only have so much money, and so much time. And so you put out a Grand Theft Auto 6, unfortunately, everything around that is going to get cannibalized. Not just the games and movies and all. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be an atomic bomb that hits in the entertainment industry all around, and because that's what people are going to be wanting to play. And so it'll be it'll be interesting to see what happens next year, assuming it doesn't get delayed again. We'll see about that. But supposedly, one of the main head honchos of Rockstar, I think, came out and said that they're pretty confident with this release, but we'll see. But yeah, so for anybody who's really wanting to play Grand Theft Auto 6, it looks like we got to wait until November of next year. And I am anticipating the game. I do want to see it. I definitely want to play it. I'm not like super hyped for it, but I mean, if the game is as ambitious as it looks and sounds and plays and all that, and then yeah, I mean, this could very much be a very landmark generational title. I mean, just looking at the trailers that have come out, I mean, it looks stunning. It's like, oh my god, that really is a virtual world that they created that you can partake in. And for anyone that has played any Grand Theft Auto game, just knowing how fun it can be just to get in the world, mess around in it and all, whether if you're just doing the missions or just literally just messing around in it and all, it can be hella fun. And this just looks like incredibly detailed and all. And I mean, I'm sure the budget on this is just stupid for whatever it is. But it could be, I mean, I don't think no game should cost this much to make. I mean, it's a ridiculous amount. I mean, I heard it's like in the billions, I think. But it seems like it's a very premium product as far as how much it costs to make. But you're getting that a premium product, right? From what it looks like, or at least we would hope. Because God, can you imagine if this game sucks? Oh, jeez, that'd be something. But I'm sure it'll be good and all that. And yeah, we just have to wait for a bit for it to come out. Um, but yeah, so that's what I have there for modern gaming stuff. So let's get into 1993. 1993, as I started kind of going through this year, doing a little bit of research on this year, it's there's a lot of cool stuff that happened, a lot of games too also. And for me personally, as I started looking at some of the games that came out and then kind of looking a little bit ahead and all, the stretch of like 1993 and 1994 were not only the true heart, I feel, of like the console war between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, but also two of like back to back some of the best years in gaming. Because as I was going back through this, because I'm also doing on my YouTube, like on the side, going through like the Game Fan magazines, and right now I'm going through the year of 1993, and as I've been just kind of reliving those memories and all, there was just so many good stuff that was coming out during this stretch here of these years. And yeah, definitely some of the, I mean, I was a kid, a teenager, and also I was right in the right state to really be able to appreciate these games and all. But like, yeah, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good stuff and all in 1993 and later 1994, which we'll talk about next week, is just definitely some of the best years in gaming. Um, but let's get into this here. So let's see. So 1993, and one thing I will say, 1993 specifically, though, I'll say this right now from the start. I really feel that this was probably one of the best years for Sega. They had a lot of great stuff that came out, and it was yeah, definitely one of their better years, I feel, and for me personally. Um, and this is where this stretch right here is why the Genesis owned the Super Nintendo for a while, at least up to a bit. Again, I've talked about it before. Eventually, I feel like what the Super Nintendo ended up doing afterwards in the next 2 years or so, it pushed it above the Genesis, in my opinion. But up to this point right now, the Genesis for me was owning the Super Nintendo. It just had more games that I was interested in and all, and just a lot of really good games. And um, uh, but yeah, I mean it's why the Genesis put up a good fight against the Super Nintendo, basically, and why this console war is so remembered. So again, up to this point right here. But let's start digging into this here. Excuse me. So 1993 saw many sequels and prequels in video games such as Dragon Ball Z, Super Boduden, Mortal Kombat 2, Sonic City, Secret of Mana, and Super Street Fighter 2, alongside new titles such as Star Fox, FIFA International Soccer, Doom, Gunstar Heroes, Myst, Samurai Showdown, Ridge Racer, NBA Jam, Disney's Aladdin, Virtual Fighter, and Mystery Dungeon. The year's highest grossing video game worldwide was Capcom's arcade fighting game Street Fighter 2 for the third year in a row, while again being the year's highest grossing entertainment product. The best-selling home system around the globe was a Nintendo Entertainment System, or no, I'm sorry, the Nintendo Super Famicom. So that was around the world, right? Um, let's see, but Game of the Year looks like some of the companies. So it looks like Electronic Gaming Monthly, so EGM, they awarded it to Samurai Showdown. But then some others from like other publications was Star Fox, Disney's Aladdin, the Sega one, Gunstar Heroes from GameFan, all right, and Mortal Kombat from Game Informer. Let's see. So again, so the highest grossing arcade game, so it was Street Fighter 2, was the highest grossing entertainment product of 1993, earning more than the film Jurassic Park. The following table lists the year's top grossing arcade games in Japan, the United Kingdom, and United States. Well, let's see. We'll just look at some of these here. So Japan, yeah. So Street Fighter 2, yeah. United Kingdom also. But well, in the United States, it was actually well, it shows NBA Jam. So I'm not. I don't know. I think maybe there's a bit of a typo there because they said it was also in the U.S. But in Japan, the highest grossing arcade games of 1993. So it was Street Fighter 2 Turbo, number one. Fatal Fury 2 at number 2. Puyo Puyo at number 3. Super Street Fighter 2 Dash, the Champion Edition, at number 4. Warriors of Fate at number 5. Samurai Showdown at number 6. World Heroes 2 at number 7. Virtual Racing at number 8. Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior at number 9. And Art of Fighting at number 10. Let's see, for the United States. So, okay, here we go. So, in the United States, NBA Jam was the highest grossing arcade game of 1993, followed by Mortal Kombat. Both games exceeded the 300 million domestic 300 million, or exceeded the 300 million equivalent in 650 million in 2024 domestic box office gross of Jurassic Park that year. The following titles were the highest grossing arcade video games of the year, according to the Amusement and Music Operations Association. So number 1, NBA Jam. And then number 2, it has a bunch of games listed. Street Fighter 2, Lethal Enforcers, Mortal Kombat, and Virtual Racing. So the best-selling home system, so number 1 was the Super Nintendo at 49,100,000. The Sega Genesis was at 30,750,000. Nintendo was at
The Nintendo, I'm sorry, the Game Boy was at 3,750,000 for this year. And then the Game Gear was at 2,283,000. The Sega CD was at 1,164,000. The Nintendo Entertainment System was 1,145,000. The Sega Master System was 7,800,000. The NEC PC Engine was 400,000. And the FM Towns Marty was 45,000. And the Panasonic 3DO was 40,000. Best-selling home video games. Let's see. So Street Fighter 2 for the, let's see. So it just says multi-platform here because Genesis got a version, and we'll talk about that later. But that was at 5 million. Mortal Kombat shows also multi-platform, so that was at 3 million. Star Fox on the Super Nintendo was at 1,700,000. Disney's Aladdin for the Sega Genesis was 1,600,000. And then Dragon Ball Z was at 1,300,000. Secret of Mana was at 1,002,000. Number 7 was Super Mario Collection at 877,000. Romancing Saga 2 was at 823,000. Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden 2 was at 740,000. And Super Mario Kart was at 700,000. Okay. So in the United States, the following titles were the two top highest grossing home video game franchises in 1993. So Mario, it just says Mario in general, so I'm assuming just the franchise. Yeah, it's okay. It says franchise. It says so 700 million, and Sonic the Hedgehog 500 million. So at this point, Mario would have had Mario 1, 2, and 3. And if they're including all the games in the Mario, right? So then all the Mario, like, random little spin-off games, too, also, that were, like, on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sonic would have only had Sonic the Hedgehog, and then Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and then if they're counting Sonic CD also, that was already at 500 million. So, damn, Sonic was really a big seller, huh? I knew it sold well, but I don't know how accurate that is, though. But I mean, all right, I mean, that's what Wikipedia says. But yeah, let's see. So some events that happened during this year. So in March in Sweden, the video game magazine Superplay starts. The original name is Superpower. On April 27th, the book Game Over by David Shelf devotes the history of Nintendo is published by Random House. And May 11th, the first Funko Land location in McHenry County, Illinois opens in Crystal Lake, bringing the chain's total number of locations to 62. On May 24th, Sega introduces the first ever video game content rating system, the Video Game Rating Council. So we're going to go back to that there. On August 4th, FuncoLand parent company Funko releases lease of space for new locations in 6 shopping centers in the New York City area. In October, Edge is a multi-format video game magazine published by Future PLC, which began publication. October 1st, Nintendo and Silicon Graphics collaborate and begin work on Project Reality. I wonder what that is. And then December 7th, the first 2 congressional hearings on video games takes place. Topics of discussion include the depiction of violence and sexual content in video games, their influence on children, and the prospect of governmental regulation for video game content. So again, we're going to go back to that here in a bit. But just business-related stuff. So new companies, Crow Team, NVIDIA, Take-Two Interactive, and Shiny. Defunct companies are DK-Tronics and Epix, spelled EPYX. And then Magnavox is acquired by Carlyle Group, and Micropose is acquired by Spectrum Holobyte. Okay. So as far as hardware goes, Sega releases the Model 2, an arcade system board that introduces 3D texture filtering. It becomes their most popular arcade system board. Model 2 already came out in this year, huh? Let's see. Fujitsu releases the FN Towns Marty in Japan, the first 32-bit home console starting the fifth generation. So we're already starting the fifth generation. Panasonic, Goldstar, and Sanyo released the first version of the 3DO 32-bit console later. And then the Atari Corporation releases Jaguar home console, calling it the first 64-bit video game system. Commodore Magazine Machines releases the Mega CD32 multimedia home console. And Nintendo releases a smaller design Nintendo, which allows cartridges to be inserted on the top of the console instead of the front. And Pioneer releases the Laser Active Multimedia Home Console. And Sega's Mega CD is released in Europe and Australia. Okay, so let's start kind of diving into some of this stuff here. So let's first start off here with the whole thing about the video game rating and things like that. So let's go back to, so according to this, it says May 24th. So again, Sega of America introduces the first ever video game content rating system, the Video Game Rating Council. So let's read on this here. So it was introduced by Sega of America in 1993 to rate all video games that were released for sale in the United States and Canada for the Master System, Genesis, Game Gear, Sega CD, 32X, and Pico. The rating had to be clearly displayed on the front of the box, but their appearance and advertisement for the video game was strictly optional. It was later supplanted by the industry-wide Entertainment Software Rating Board. So as the 16-bit era of video games began in the late 1980s, their content became more realistic. The increased graphical and audio fidelity of the products made violent scenes appear more explicit, especially those containing blood. As controversy stemmed around the realism of this violence, 1992 games Mortal Kombat and Night Trap entered the limelight. Mortal Kombat is a brutal fighting game, and Night Trap is a full-motion video Sega CD game where players protect a slumber party from, I'm going to use this in quotations, vampires. But the games were the center of federal hearings held from March 9th, 1993 to March 4th of 1994 by United States Senators Joseph Lieberman and Herb Kohl. As a result, the video game industry was given an ear to create its own classification system or to otherwise have one imposed on them by the federal government. In 1993, British censors banned Night Trap from being sold to children under 15 years old in the United Kingdom, which was an influence on Sega's decision to create an age rating system. Prior to the hearing, Sega had become aware of rumblings from politicians that video games content was being scrutinized. As Sega was preparing to release the controversial Mortal Kombat for the Sega Genesis, the company worked to create its own rating system so they would be able to market Mortal Kombat as a mature game not intended for children. Sega initially tried to license Motion Picture Association of America own rating system, but the MPAA, so Motion Picture Association of America, refused. Instead, Sega created its own Video Game Rating Council, or VRC for sure, and revealed its existence in May 24th of 1993. The council consisted of experts in education, psychology, and sociology as appointed by Sega. The VRC was one of the several rating groups to appear, among them 3DO's 3DO rating system. The VRC classified games that worked with Sega's console into three categories based on age. So GA for general audiences, MA13 for mature audiences, and MA17 for adults. It was criticized by journalists and consumer groups for vagueness and inconsistency. And other companies did not want Sega to be in charge of the ratings organization. This was particularly true for Nintendo, which was in rival with Sega in North America in the video game market at this time. Nintendo said that the rating system could be used to justify even more violent games. Sega responded by accusing Nintendo of hypocrisy for allowing fighting games such as Street Fighter II on its system. The lead editorial in the January 1994 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly also criticized Sega for failing to inform and educate the public of the rating system, particularly noting that the ratings appears on the game boxes, but usually not in advertisements for the games, and that most parents either haven't a clue as to what Sega's ratings mean and don't know that they exist or don't know why the game got that rating. Following the hearing, the game industry created the Interactive Digital Software Association in April 1994, which made a proposal for a rating system. Upon the formation of the IDSA, Sega attempted to get the rating system, but it was declined by IDSA member Nintendo, who feared that they did not want to deal with its competitor. The proposal was adopted by the United States Congress in July of 1994, and the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB as we know it now, was founded in September to execute the plan. The VRC ultimately folded that year when replaced by ESRB. VRC ratings have been used on several hundred games made by Sega and others. So, let's see. So before the Video Game Rating Council, so while rival console manufacturer Nintendo enforced strict content guidelines for games released on its hardware in North America, Sega differentiated itself with a more liberal content policy, allowing for the depiction of blood and graphic violence in software released on its home consoles, provided that the publisher labeled the game's packaging with a generic parental advisory warning. Such an advisory was put on the packaging for the following games: Technocop, Splatterhouse 2, and Death Duel. However, nudity and other sexual content remained taboo. Games made for Sega systems generally toned down sexual content. The nude fairies found in Stormlord were given scantily clad attire when the game was ported over to the Sega Genesis. Similarly, when Sega localized Phantasy Star 2 for Western consumers, it edited dialogue in the game to obscure a non-playable character's homosexuality. Huh, I didn't know that. So notable cases. So Mortal Kombat. So the video game company Acclaim brought Mortal Kombat to the Genesis and Super Nintendo in 1993. Both Sega and Nintendo ordered the game's graphic violence and blood to be toned down. However, Sega allowed the player to restore the controversial content with a secret code, announced the creation of the video game rating council, and gave Mortal Kombat an MA13 rating. The results was that the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat outsold the Super Nintendo version. However, the commercial success of the game, including a marketing campaign by Acclaim to prepare consumers for Mortal Monday, and the fact that the Video Game Rating Council opened the doorway for games to be sold on a Genesis or on a Sega console system with adult content, promoted national outrage. All versions of Mortal Kombat and some versions of Mortal Kombat 2 for Sega systems were brought to Japan with their rating intact on the box art as courtesy of Acclaim's Japanese subsidiary. This marks the first time a rating system was used in Japan, preceding Sega's own CERO and IARC by a few years. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, long story short, and this is where I also recommend reading that Console Wars book and all, or even just watching the documentary, because this is where it got kind of heated between Sega and Nintendo also in the courtroom. So it started in 1993 and then kind of prolonged into 1994, but I'll just cover it all here now. And so basically, so they went to court, and so my understanding was that, so it was Howard Lincoln. He was like one of the main representatives that spoke on Nintendo's behalf during these court hearings. So he's been a lawyer for them for a while, pretty a well-known figure for Nintendo at that point. But the person that went to represent Sega, I forgot his name, but basically, according to the book and the documentary that I saw on this, he worked for Nintendo. He left Nintendo because, again, I think he wasn't too happy with them for one reason or the other. And so then he went to speak for Sega against Nintendo. So there was a bit of a bad blood there, right? And you got to read the book and watch the documentary. There's some pretty funny takes that they have regarding that session there, because it's kind of like, this guy was like, the hell with Nintendo. And then Nintendo's like, really, dude, you're going to backstab us like that? But in these hearings and all, you can hear Howard Lincoln from Nintendo, that Sega is bringing these games out and they're poisoning our children's minds, blah, 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 blah. And Sega's like, hey, we're trying to make it so that we can put some kind of a rating on it, and then also accusing Nintendo of some other things. So it almost got a little childish, but that's, again, part of the whole fun of this console war time. But ultimately, it looks like Congress said, like, you guys need to do something or we're going to do something for you. And then that's where the ESRB was put on, was put in place to, to start rating video games, which I think was, it's all fair, right? And all, because, video games were getting, more explicit in their content. And I mean, I was playing Mortal Kombat back when I was like, what, 13 years old or so. But, as a overall society and all that, yeah, that stuff should be regulated. Release the content for sure, but, let consumers know what they're getting. I guess. So I feel like that was all fair right there. But yeah, it was, Mortal Kombat and Night Trap were the ones that kind of got into that discussion there. But yeah, I wanted to touch a bit on that there. So for anybody that doesn't know, so like when you see ratings on video games and all that, I mean, it's pretty standard nowadays, but that's where it all started, was because of that. Um, but let's get into some video games now. Just talking about video games. So Mortal Kombat. So Mortal Kombat, it came out in the arcades in the previous year, right? But this is where it came out for the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And so yeah, so basically on the Genesis one, when the game first boots up and it's giving like a text crawl of the story to Mortal Kombat, you put in a code at that point and it's like CABBCABCC, I don't know, something like that. But then if you put it in correctly, the letters turn the outlines of the letters turn red, and I think you hear Scorpions go, "Get over here," and so then that lets you know that you implemented the code successfully, and so now you got blood coming out and all. Not quite as intense like in the arcades, but it's there, and the fatalities are there. Sub-Zero rips off people's heads and spinal cords and all, and Kano rips out people's hearts, and all that good stuff is still there. And where the Super Nintendo version was very the like Sub-Zero's fatality, I think he freezes you and then he punches you and you just kind of shatter, right? But no blood or nothing like that. So it's definitely a toned down version. And so this is so again, in this stretch right here, this is another big bump that Sega had over Nintendo, because the sales of Mortal Kombat, it sold more than the Super Nintendo version because of the blood. Now, when you look at the games, they don't, the Super Nintendo one, at first glance and all that, it does look better than the Sega Genesis version. It actually looks fairly better. I mean, quite a bit better, actually, in my opinion. Looks a lot closer to the arcade. Not quite arcade perfect, but much closer to it than the Sega Genesis version. The sprites are smaller on both versions and all, and they're not quite as detailed in the backgrounds and all that as the arcade, but it definitely looked closer. But where the Sega Genesis version was better, though, overall, was because, well, first of all, the blood, right? I mean, that's kind of the appeal of Mortal Kombat. Because to me, the original Mortal Kombat games, they're fun, they play good, but I don't think that they're quite as well balanced or as fun to play as like something like Street Fighter 2 or even a lot of like the SNK fighting games. But what makes them fun to play, though, even funner, is because of the violence. I mean, that's part of the appeal of the game. So when you take that away, well, you're taking a big component of the game away, and then you're just kind of left with this somewhat bland fighter. And that's what the Super Nintendo felt like. But again, the other thing too, also what the Genesis had over the Super Nintendo one, is that when I've played the Super Nintendo version, and I think a lot of people felt this back then, is that there is a bit of a lag when you're trying to control your characters, as this Genesis one just felt very responsive, but not quite on the Super Nintendo one. Because I want to say, I think I read that in the magazines back then, and so so the Genesis one didn't look as good and didn't sound as good, but it played much better and it had the blood, and so therefore it just sold a lot better, right, on the Sega Genesis, and rightly so. I mean, that was it was just a better port, more faithful to the arcade in terms of like content and the way it played. And so that was a big bump that Sega had over the Super Nintendo. But I mean, the Super Nintendo definitely, now I said that this year earlier, that for me, Sega really kicked ass during this year, but Super Nintendo definitely wasn't no slouch. So some of the standouts here that it had, so it had Super Mario All-Stars, which was one of the first examples of remakes that are getting done now in video games, at least on a bigger scale, because it was Nintendo going back and remastering their 2D Mario games. So Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 2, and Super Mario Brothers 3. And so it's giving them a new coat of paint, more or less the same games, but just, with 16-bit graphics and sounds and all. And so what's kind of a big deal back then, I feel, because it's like, hey, this is a way of keeping the past alive. And so it was sort of the start of that. Now, Nintendo gets a lot of shit for a lot of things, and rightly so, but
outside of like their pricing, okay, and for the most part, I feel like they do a decent enough job on their remakes and remasters that they do of their older content, even up to this day. I mean, again, there's a lot of things you can criticize on that and all. For me, a lot of it is the pricing, right? It's just, it's like, come on, you guys are really like the Super Mario Galaxy games that came out. It's like, come on, those should have been like $20 each, but whatever, it is what it is. But outside of that, I feel like they do a pretty good job overall as far as like bringing the games up to speed as far as their graphics, content, remastering, and things like that. And this is where it started. It's a really good collection. I mean, you get those three excellent games along with Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels, which was the actual sequel to the first Mario Brothers game, but that game had only been released in Japan, but now here it is in this package deal. So that was kind of a cool deal, right? Where we're starting to see some games that were exclusively in Japan coming over here stateside. And so that was pretty cool. But yeah, an excellent package. And then eventually, I don't know when this version came out, but there was a version of this package that came out that also had Super Mario World on it. So that right there, you get four excellent 8-bit or Mario games from the 8-bit days and Super Mario World. That's a lot of like quality in one package, and definitely one of the better deals in gaming. I mean, it was just a really good package of games that were included in all this here. And then I believe, I think you can play this on the Nintendo Switch Online. So uh, good stuff. I mean, definitely for me was a win for Nintendo this year. But they also had Star Fox, and so Star Fox was kind of a big deal where my understanding of the development of this game, so it was some developer from Agronaut Studios, I think, or Agronaut Company, whatever they were called. And so he developed some kind of like a chip that would expand on the Super Nintendo's graphical capabilities. And so he developed this chip, he showed it off to Nintendo somehow, and they liked it so much that they wanted to use it somehow with their own touch to it, though. And so what I understand, so this dude and his company developed the game, but Shigeru Miyamoto had a hand in it as far as like overseeing the project, I think. And I think he created the characters, so like Fox McCloud and what are the names? Falco and Peppy and Slippy or whatever the names are. I think I could be wrong on that, but I know Shigeru Miyamoto had a hand in it at all. And out came Star Fox. So it was a big deal because, we're starting to get into 3D, right? We're starting to mess around with it and all. And here is a game on the 16-bit systems, right? That was doing like 3D polygonal graphics. I mean, when you look back on the game, it looks it looks really dated. The frame rate is not the greatest and all. But again, you put yourself back in 1993 on a 16-bit system. It was pretty impressive. And I saw this video. I don't know how accurate this is. I mean, I just read the sales figures on it earlier, whatever it was, whatever it sold. I think I said like 1 million something, whatever. But I saw this video that this guy claimed that Star Fox was the fastest selling video game, I think like when it initially launched, up to that point. Again, I don't know how accurate that is, but I wouldn't doubt it though, because I do remember Star Fox being a big deal, and it was kind of a highlight, like at some of these convention shows and all before it came out. That like, look, you don't need CD technology or 32-bit power to have like these polygonal graphics, because again, 32-bit systems were starting to come out, which I'll touch base here in a bit later. But this is being done on the Super Nintendo, and all you needed was like just like a chip, in the cart, right, to make that all work. So it's kind of a big deal for Nintendo. And yeah, I mean that was definitely cool that I could do that. But yeah, it has some other stuff too also. So Mega Man X, I believe, came out this year. I haven't played Mega Man X. I'm still kind of trying to go through the original Mega Man games, but I know that this game is very beloved by a lot of people and supposedly one of the more fan favorite games of the Mega Man series outside of like Mega Man 2. I always hear Mega Man 2 and Mega Man X are like at the top of the list of like a lot of people's favorite overall Mega Man games. I've played like a little bit of it, and it seems fun. So I should try to give it a go here at some point later. But then we had Secret of Mana. Also, so this was a game from Square, and it was kind of like an action RPG. It ended up being pretty popular on there.
It's like a kind of an embarrassing story. And it's a game that I definitely would want to get into, right? It's like right up my alley of something that I would like. I love Square Enix from games from like the 16-bit era. So definitely something that I was like, oh, okay, this would definitely be a game that I should get into. So, I mean, I've tried playing it on emulation, and then I have also the Collection of Mana collection that's I got it on the Switch, on the Switch. And I've tried it a handful of times. This is gonna sound stupid. So anybody that's ever played Secret of Mana, feel free to laugh at me and all. But how the fuck do you get that sword at the beginning of the game? Because I can't figure that out. I've tried it several times. I'm like, it's like on a river or a stream and all, and I go down there and I can't seem to get that sword out. I'm like, and I've tried it several times, and I haven't looked up like a walkthrough or anything, right? I know, because the whole time I'm playing, I'm like, I feel stupid. This is probably like the most easiest thing in the world, and I'm missing something. But I've tried it a handful of times already. Like I think I've tried starting this game like 3 times, and I can't get past that scene. And I'm like, you know what? Just out of embarrassment, I just have turned off the game and all. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm too stupid apparently to play this game. But like, am I the only one? I mean, did anybody ever else get stuck on that? But regardless of my dumbass trying to play that game, it seems like it was a pretty popular game from back then from Square and on the Super Nintendo, and one that I do want to try to play at some point. But let's see. But they also have Battletoads and Battle Maniacs. So this was a game from Rare, and was it seemed to be a pretty popular game. It seems like I haven't really gone into the Battletoads games that much. Like I've tried playing the one on the Super Nintendo, or I'm sorry, on the original Nintendo, and then this one here too also, and they're fun. I mean, they're cool. They seem kind of like take inspiration from like something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with the whole reptile / amphibian character that have like the attitude and all. So it's cool for that and all. But I don't know, something about the beat 'em up gameplay and all that. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't hook me like the way something like Streets of Rage would and all. But the graphics are cool in it. The concept is cool on it and all. So I can imagine why a lot of Nintendo players might have gone into this game back in the day. Let's see. But then also they had The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. And so this was the first portable Zelda game, and it's a pretty fun adventure. I've never played this one, but I've gotten a little ways into the remake that was on the Switch. And just the overall concept of the game and all seems pretty fun. A little bit of a different take on Zelda. Where I mean, it's a top-down Zelda game, but I don't think Zelda's in the game, and it has a bit of a different like lore and setting and all that, right? Than what we're normally used to for Zelda games, because it takes place on an island and all. But it still has like classic Zelda gameplay as far as like the dungeon designs and the how you traverse through the map and things like that. So yeah, it was a cool little Zelda game there. But and I'm sure there was some other stuff that came out on the Nintendo. Let's see. I mean, well, obviously there was, but honestly, I'm just trying to see like any other standout stuff that was on there. Let's see, Star Fox and Mega Man X, I would think would buy. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, that was a big one too also. And it's just a really fun game. And this one was, had a better reputation being on the Super Nintendo than it did on the Sega Genesis. And just a fun game overall. Perfect game for Halloween if you want to play like a retro horror game of some sort. It's not really scary, obviously. It's just, but it has like a scary theme to it. But it also had Breath of Fire. That was from what it seems like a pretty popular RPG for back then from Capcom. What else would have come out on the Super Nintendo? Well, NBA Jam, and I don't know if the home ports came out of NBA Jam in this year, but we'll talk about NBA Jam a little bit later because that relates more to the arcade. But so actually, let's skip that as far as Nintendo goes. But yeah, I mean, obviously they had some other games and all, but those are just some of the more standout ones that I can find here. But for the Nintendo side of things, I mean, Nintendo was still alive and kicking, and it had Kirby's Adventure, which seems like it was a kind of a big deal for Nintendo games. I don't think it was the first Kirby game, but it was the first Kirby game on a Nintendo home console, I believe. And I've never messed around too much with the Kirby games, so I can't say I know too much about them. But it looks like it was a pretty popular game on the original Nintendo, and the graphics were pretty impressive on it from what I can tell. And so For anybody that hadn't quite made the jump to the 16-bit, I can only imagine that this would have been a pretty fun game to play for them back then. Let's see. Oh, and also one thing that did come out on the, was it on the Super Nintendo? Um, yeah, so it looks like now this was only in Japan, but it looks like there was Dragon Quest 1 and 2 came out like on a compilation where it had the first two games on there that had more or less the same games, right, as their, the Nintendo ones, only just, with 16-bit graphics and sound. So kind of what they did with the Super Mario collection, right? But only with, Nintendo, or I'm sorry, with the Dragon Quest games. And those games, were really popular in Japan. So, just kind of going back a little bit, I forgot to mention. So, like what I've been playing for this week and all, nothing too much, but I did get the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 collection, the HD 2D remakes, and I've been playing Dragon Quest 1 on it. That's been what I've been playing this past week. Haven't, I just got a little ways into it, but it's cool though. I do enjoy it. It's a great way to play that game. So, little side note on that. But Sega though, I feel had a really great year. Although they didn't have a Sonic game like a mainline Sonic game on the Genesis. So, well, let's get into it. So, multi-platform games, though they came out on both of them. So there was Cool Spot. I don't quite recall what the perception of this game was back then. I was very much into Game Fan magazine back then. I would kind of skim through like Game Pro and EGM back in the day, but I don't really recall a lot of their reviews. So some of the stuff that I'm talking about, I may get wrong. Like if I say something like, I don't think this game was really popular, but maybe one of the other magazines really actually did rave about it. No, I just don't recall. But Cool Spot, though, I remember Game Fan really raving about this game. And it came out both on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And it's a really cool platformer. It's one that I feel like has gotten kind of lost in time. And probably part of the reason why it wouldn't be released is, like, first of all, I don't think it was that popular overall. And second of all, it was, has a license, right, from 7-Up. But it's a really fun platformer. It's a really great game. It was developed by Virgin Games and David Perry, who, he was getting some fame back then as a developer. And it's a really fun game and all. And I played this on the Sega Genesis version. I don't really know like if it's a lot better than the Super Nintendo one or the Super Nintendo one is better. I'm not sure. I just know that it was a really well playing game on the Sega Genesis, and I get the feeling like it was more popular on there, but I could be wrong on that. But either way, great game though. But the one that was kind of one of the so this is again where you're starting to see a showdown between Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, and so there was so I'm going to talk about three games here. I already talked about one, Mortal Kombat, right? So the Genesis one was overall better received on it. Another game that the Sega had that had one up on the Super Nintendo was Aladdin. So Aladdin. When did the movie come out? I think it came out in 1992. I could be wrong on that, but I think the movie had already been out. And it's a really popular animated movie from Disney, right? It's an all-time classic. It's a beautiful movie. For some reason you haven't watched it, definitely watch it, right? I mean, it's an all-time classic. The animation on it is beautiful. I miss hand-drawn animation like that. The acting and the story overall is just really great, and of course has one of the best performances from the late and great Robin Williams. If anything, just watch it for him. I mean, he is so funny as a genie, and just it's a great animation show. But wouldn't think something that would like make like a good video game, but it did. So Nintendo and Sega had got the license, right? Well, they farmed it out to another company, right, to make games on their platform. So the Nintendo version was made by Capcom. Now, Capcom up to this point has had a pretty good reputation for making Disney-based games on a Nintendo system, going back from like DuckTales and Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, and oh, let's see, the Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse game, right? So they've already had a reputation for making quality Disney games on a Nintendo system, and so Aladdin was no different. I mean, I've played a little bit of it, so I don't know too much about it, but it was pretty well received. I mean, it's a fun game. It's, you know, on its own, it's a fine game. But the Sega Genesis version was done by Version Games, also headed by David Perry. So I mentioned before, he did Cool Spot, and then he also did the Global Gladiators game that I believe came out in the previous year. I don't know if I talked about it in the last episode, but that was a pretty decent game also. So he was getting some fame as a developer, and then he'll have another big hit in the next 2 years. But, you know, we'll talk about that later, next year's. But anyway, so him and his team did Aladdin. Now, for the Sega Genesis, again, by Virgin Games. Now, what I understand of their version, they had a really limited time to make it. I don't know if Capcom had how much time they had, but I remember it was being advertised a lot or talked about a lot that Virgin Games only had a really limited time on making this game. I think I read somewhere like 16 weeks. I don't know again, the accuracy of that, but it seems like they were in a bit of a rush to make this game. And so that whatever the case was, they pulled off one of the best games on the Genesis, where because they also had help from like the Disney animators. So when you play the game, it feels really well to control. Like Aladdin just feels, he's like one of the best controlling characters in a 2D game out there. And his animations are so smooth, and the way he transitions from like attacking to jumping to, you know, walking up some stairs, hanging on ledges and all that stuff. I mean, he just controls like a dream. And the level layouts are really fun also too. And the look of the game, it is much more accurate to the look of the cartoon more than the Nintendo one. And the Nintendo one, again, is no slouch. It's just that the one on the Genesis just really got the feel of the movie a lot closer, I feel. And overall, it's just a better playing game. It's just it just feels more fun to control and all. And the music is very, you know, I mean, it does a pretty good job on the, you know, the limited Sega Genesis sound chip to mimic the sound or the soundtrack from the movie. And it's just a really well playing game, and definitely one of the best games on the Genesis. And you know, who would have thought Aladdin, right? You know, but it really is a great game. And this is another one where the Sega Genesis had another one up on the Super Nintendo. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a fun game, definitely a fun game. And I mean, I recommend, you know, if you want to get into classic video games and all, check out both of them. I think you'll appreciate both. But another one too, also that we had, so there was two games, and that was actually, let me double check really quick just to make sure I'm not talking out of my ass. Again, some of the stuff I should probably research more. Say Street Fighter 2. So this game came out in... No, that can't be right. Okay, yeah. Okay, so so let me back up. Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting came out in the United States here in 1993. And so it was so again, because it had come out in the arcades, you know, so Street Fighter 2 had Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, and then Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting or Turbo Edition or whatever it was called. And so that third one got a port also on the Super Nintendo, because in the previous year they had Street Fighter 2, now they're getting this version here. And it was a really excellent port, done really well, you know, with the new additions, right, that the Hyper Turbo one had in the arcade with, you know, you're able to play as the boss characters, and it had the ability to play Turbo on it and all that. And so it was a really good port. And so no shade on that one there. But the Genesis though, had it got its version now, because now, as we talked about last episode, that companies are now able to put out their games on other systems. So the Sega Genesis got Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. So the Special Champion Edition was kind of a combination between Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition in the arcades, and then also Street Fighter 2 Turbo Edition, right? Because they had some of the the turbo options on there. And so basically, they both had a port, more or less the same game on their home console, so the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Now this one is not quite as clear, right? And all that the Sega Genesis one, you can definitely say that the Super Nintendo one was better, but at the very least, the Sega Genesis had a very comparable port, right, where on a game that was normally more seen to be on the Nintendo system. Because again, Street Fighter 2 first came out on the Super Nintendo, but now the Genesis gets a version as well too. And that had some pros over the Super Nintendo version. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, there's a really funny video you can watch. There's two guys, or their channel is called Console Wars. They're super funny, and they compare a lot of like Genesis and Nintendo games, but they actually give a really great breakdown of like the differences between these two versions here. So definitely give that a watch. But basically, my opinion and what I remember and all of like the differences between them, the Super Nintendo's one's colors and graphics, I guess you can say, were better because, the Nintendo can just display more colors, while the Genesis one has a bit more of a washed out look. The animation, I would assume they're roughly about the same, but there might be things in the background and all that one does better or the other. But, more or less the Genesis or the Super Nintendo one's slightly better in graphics. Music, as far as from what I recall, I want to say that I think I prefer the Genesis one more just because it had more oomph to it, where the Super Nintendo one has a bit of that echoey kind of like muffled sound that I sometimes feel like the Super Nintendo chip has. But again, I think that's just maybe preference on your sound chip on there. The voice, though, definitely the Super Nintendo. Again, it sounds a bit muffled and all that, but the one on the Genesis is pretty horrible. I mean, it's hella scratchy, and oh god, don't try not to maybe play it too loud, because when you hear the Hadouken and it comes out like sounding like fucking garbage, it might kind of like scare you a bit if you play it up loud. So the voice is definitely the Super Nintendo. When it comes to controls, though, and this is where I prefer the Sega Genesis one, is if you have the 6-button pad, because it's going to play, you're going to get a lot of the feel of the arcade with the button layout on a Genesis pad if you invest in that control pad, as opposed to the Super Nintendo's, which also has 6 buttons, but with the has the 4 face buttons and then the 2 shoulder pads, or the 2 shoulder buttons, which for me doesn't quite lend as well to the playability of it. But yeah, fun. It was always fun to compare, the differences on those games there and all. But yeah, like I said, right? I mean, it started definitely making the Genesis more competitive with that version that it got. You can actually play that Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition on the Nintendo Switch Online app that it has for the Sega Genesis, which I was surprised they got a port of that. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So yeah, definitely check it out. So you can see what how good the Genesis port was outside of that gargly ass voice effects that it has. But just let me just go over some of the games that came out on the Genesis here, right? And I'm including Sega CD stuff also because this is so the Sega CD, it came out late last year in the United States, but then this year is where it had more of a where it was like its first full year right here in the United States, and there was some pretty good stuff that came out on it, right? So just Sega overall, right? So the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD. I mean, we had Gunstar Heroes. Probably the best running gun shooter of all time. I mean, ask pretty much anybody, this is the game that they're going to go to. And even though Contra was sort of like the, I guess you could say the godfather of running gun shooting games, there might have been some other ones before that, but I think Contra really turned that genre or made it its own thing, right? But Gunstar Heroes was just an amazing game for the Genesis. Probably one of the better examples outside of Sonic of what the Genesis is. Fast action gameplay, colorful graphics, cool music, with a very Japanese sort of feel to it and all. And Treasure just really made that Genesis sing with all its fast gameplay, special effects galore. I mean, some of the stuff that happens in this game, like when you're fighting that one kind of army dude on the airplane and everything kind of rotates around, or later on in the game where you're like in some kind of a reactor and then there's like this robot that kind of scales in and out of the screen and all. I mean, it's truly amazing how they made the the Sega Genesis shine in this game here. But Gunstar Heroes, one of the funnest games you'll ever play, and again, one of the shiny beacons on the Sega Genesis. Came out this year. Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master. So Shinobi 3 originally had come out in late 1992, I believe, but it's something weird happened with this game where like it got finished, but then I think before it went out to actual sale, like they went back and restructured the game a bit, and ultimately the later version came out in 1993, and it ended up being a really good version, really good game. I personally don't like it as much as Revenge of Shinobi, but it is an excellent 2D ninja game, and I can see why this is a lot of people's favorite Shinobi game. Because it does have more moves than Revenge of Shinobi. The graphics are in many ways better, and the music isn't quite as good, but it's still pretty good, and just the overall action and all that, it's pretty fun. And so just another excellent game in the Shinobi series of games, and came out this year too. So definitely another must buy on the Genesis. Had Ranger X, which was originally called Esperanza in Japan, but it was made by Gao Entertainment, and they were getting a reputation for just making games that just had a lot of cool special effects in them and all. And so Ranger X is you play like this mech kind of like warrior, and you can get into like kind of like this motorcycle looking thing, and so the way you can combine with you being in the mech suit and then getting into this motorcycle thing and all, and because it has different gameplay between each, is really fun. And the graphics were just really amazing in this game, and had a lot of cool objectives that you can do in each level. Some cool bosses, a lot of cool effects, like I said, right, and all like the line scrolling that you see in it on some of the boss fights, and all looks really amazing. Just a really excellent game. It's a game that, as far as I know, it hasn't really been ported over to like a Sega Genesis compilation, because it's not on the Sega Genesis compilation that came out, some years ago. It's not on the Nintendo Switch Online app either. So I haven't really seen this game re-release. I don't know if it's on one of the Genesis Mini ones that came out. I'm not sure, but I wish they would really re-release this game, because it really is an excellent Genesis game. It's I think I've talked about before, a Cybernator game that came out on the Super Nintendo, which I really liked. Well, this is for me Genesis' answer to a game like that, and I prefer this one over that one, even though Cybernator is excellent too. But yeah, Ranger X, another really great Genesis game. And then we also had Jungle Strike, which it was a sequel to the Desert Strike game. So again, it's these helicopter simulation games and all. So a little bit more on the slower pace games and all, but definitely if you like those kind of games, they were really excellent back then. And from what I recall, at least I know, at least with Desert Strike, these games tended to play and sound a little bit better on the Genesis than the Super Nintendo one. But either way, whether if it did or not, just another game you can play on the Genesis along with the Super Nintendo. Because I think they came out at the same time. I'm not quite sure. And then we had X-Men, which was based off of like the really popular animated series that was going on during this time. Now, X-Men was a popular game, and it sold pretty well for the Genesis, but this one I do have a bit of a hard time recommending, because it's tough. The game is tough, and it's a bit rough too also, and by that I mean that like the frame rate on the game, it's a little slow, the animations are a little slow, so it kind of makes the control feel a little awkward. And I don't know. It's kind of a hard game to recommend because of that. It's a really hard game, and but if you're a fan of the X-Men and all, a lot of people seem to like it. Maybe I don't know how much of it was just a license that made this game sell really well, because I remember people really talking about how hard it was and all. But if you've never played it before, but you are an X-Men fan, it's worth checking out. Just know that you're getting into a game that's kind of rough and pretty hard too. But I at the time really tried to get into it because I was a huge fan of the animated show from back then. And I just really like the X-Men, so much so that I remember the cover to this game has a really cool cover where it has like all the X-Men kind of like coming at you. And I remember I drew like a really big picture of that where I combined like almost like 6 pages and drew it all out. But anyways, my artistic brain that back then, I actually did a fairly decent job on that. Good job, bro. But X-Men on the Genesis, hard game. And it also has a bit of a glitch in the game where it seemed like a lot of players had a hard time passing this part, because again, this is before the internet where things were just more widely available. It just seems like sometime later in the game, the way you can beat a certain section is by holding down the reset button on your console, and you have to like hold it down, because I think I read where like if you press it, it actually resets the game. You want to hold it down a little bit so that it actually triggers for you to advance in the game. Something like that. I never got that far, but that's something that I read a lot on this game that was kind of a popular, I guess, glitch on it. But yeah, for what it's worth, it was one of the more popular games on the Genesis. I think it was developed by Sega too themselves. Um, but FIFA Soccer also, again, this might have come out on the Super Nintendo in the same year, but again, this is just where the EA games just tended to play a little bit better, were more popular on the Genesis. So FIFA, soccer is not as popular here in the United States, but my family, we for a long time, we always had like in each generation of video games, we had like a soccer game per generation that we all really got into. So that would have been me, my brother, to an extent, my dad, and then some of my uncles and friends, where there was just like a soccer game that we just really, got deep into. And, we would have tournaments and all. And FIFA soccer games, or well, not just FIFA, but soccer games in general, up until, well, it kind of ended out after the fifth generation and all, but for a while there, the multiplayer that we would play on are some of my funnest memories I've had of playing video games. But like going back to the Sega Master System, it was a great soccer on the Sega Master System, and me and my brother used to love playing that game. I still have, I booted it up somewhat recently, and it's fun. It's just for 8-bit soccer games, right? I mean, obviously you can't expect too much, but it is. It's a fun little game. It has a stupid catchy little song on it and all. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. But anyways, and so that was for 8-bit, and then for 16-bit, it was FIFA Soccer. Now I want to say, I think we rented the Genesis version because it was FIFA Soccer was getting a lot of like good reviews and all, like, oh wow, this is like a really good soccer game, and because soccer games up to this point hadn't really been anything too special from what I recall, but FIFA Soccer from EA Games, this is when EA Games was actually, not the evil corporation that it is now. They were making really good, not only sports games, but also like just other games too also. But this is where they started getting their EA Games sports lineups. And so obviously they had Madden already, and and then NHL games also, which I believe NHL, that's another game too also that came out that I think I forgot to jot down, but NHL. Okay, I'll talk about it really quick before I forget. NHL 94, I think came out this year. Yeah, it would have come out this year because it's whatever the year is. So 94, the game would have released the previous year. So NHL 94 is probably one of the highest, maybe not highest rated, but one of the most popular sports games of all time, especially in the retro scene. Just a great hockey game. Even if you're not into hockey, check it out. NHL 94, excellent game. But anyways, they were also getting the soccer games, right, which are starting to become popular, and they got the FIFA license too. So the one that we really played a lot, and because like I said, it used to be like we would all get into so my brother and I shared a room back when we were kids, and so when we would have our parties there, right, for like just play, when everyone, my household was always full of people when we were growing up. We had uncles there all the time, friends there all the time, and so it was rarely a time where it was just me and my family, right? Like me, my brother, my sister, and my mom and dad. As far as like on the days off, right? It was just always, somebody was always there. It was just, we just had my parents just always loved having like a house full of people, and so there was a lot of times where we would just all huddle into our room, our small little room, with our little TV there and all play soccer games. But the one that we really got into was the Sega CD version. And I don't know if that one came out in 1993. I'm going to try to look it up here as I'm talking. But that was the one that we really got into because we rented the one on the again on the Genesis, and we really liked it. And so it was not just me and my brother; also my uncle really liked it. Some of our friends really liked it, and all. And but we had also gotten the Sega CD too, also. So that when the Sega CD one came out, that's the one we ended up getting. And yeah, I mean, we really enjoyed this one here. Let's see, from what I can tell here, it looks like it came out in 1994, so the following year. But anyways, the original one on the Sega Genesis came out in 1993. And so, yeah, that was just the game that we used to just huddle in there in the room and all play tournaments. And I remember the team that I always used to pick was, because we had like our teams, right? I used to always pick Holland, and we all got pretty good at it. So it made for a really competitive tournament that we would do there. But yeah, some of the funnest moments I've ever had is playing soccer games throughout the generations, right, and all. Because in the next generation, in the fifth one, it was the Sega World Cup soccer games, or whatever their lineup of soccer games were called. But from Sega, they actually did really good soccer games that I felt were better than the FIFA ones. And then when we got into the sixth generation, to an extent, it was the Pro Evolution Soccer, but by then we had all kind of split up, and we weren't all in the same place, so that wasn't really much a thing anymore. Um, and then in the seventh generation, a little bit of FIFA. I remember playing that a little bit with my brother online, but again, we had all already kind of moved out of the house and things like that. But during that stretch, though, right, some of the funner memories that I've had in multiplayer. But anyways, FIFA Soccer, yeah, great game. And again, the original one came out on the Sega Genesis this year. But then so the Sonic game that we did have this year, so Sonic Spinball, did that come out this year? I don't recall, but it wasn't like an actual Sonic game, right? And again, we didn't have a mainline Sonic game on the Genesis this year because we had Sonic 2 last year and Sonic 3 wouldn't show up until next year in 1994, but we had Sonic CD in 1993. And even though it was on a system that wasn't as popular, I mean, it was the best-selling game on the Sega CD, but and Sonic City also has a bit of a bad reputation too. But me personally, I really enjoyed this game, and it is my favorite Sonic game of all time. I just really enjoy the time traveling aspect to it because I feel like the levels are laid out in a way where you can take advantage of Sonic speed in most cases, but then also has that exploration element to it, right? As you're trying to find that weird clamshell looking thing to make a better future. So you get that extra playability value to it, right? Where you can go back into the future, or even if you wanted to, you can check out the or not the future, but the past, or if you wanted to, you can check out the future. But then it has a thing where if you make a good past, you make a good future, and then so to help you get the good ending. And then the bonus levels are really fun too, also. So I yeah, the only thing about this game is that the levels, the level layouts are fine for the most part. I mean, I enjoy them, except for that wacky workbench. I'm not the biggest fan of that level, but just like the theme of the levels, it's just kind of weird, where they're a little different than what we were normally used to in other Sonic games, like Quartz Quadrant, that wacky workbench. I don't know. The themes are just a little weird, but I really still enjoyed this game a lot. Just it's classic Sonic, but again with that extra element of the exploration, going back and forth, and in the past and the future. That was really fun, and also the soundtrack too is really great too. Now, back then, this was one of the Sega controversies of back then. So for anyone that doesn't know, if you get Sonic CD, because you can get it a few different ways nowadays, like you can get it on the Android, the Apple Store, and also I think on PC, and then more recently on the Sonic Origins collection. And they're all excellent, right? They're all excellent. And actually, I think that let's see, a little bit that I know of more modern trivia stuff when it comes to Sonic games. I think that the Android ports of Sonic CD was developed by this dude named Christian Whitehead, I believe. And he did such a good job on them that he is the main developer, I think, of Sonic Mania, which is a really well-received game for Sonic. Call me out if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that's correct. But anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up though is that on those versions, more modern versions that you can play, you might notice that, you can select between the Japanese and the US soundtrack version. Cool, right? And you might have a preference to one or the other. But back then, the controversy was that when this game was being shown off originally, and again, I'm going off of a lot what like Game Fan was saying, because again, that was my main magazine of choice, but I think other magazines picked up on this too, was that when it was first being shown off as the game was being developed, everyone was really raving about the music. And that it was a really great soundtrack, how obviously on being on CD was CD quality and all that. And so people were really raving about it. Well, when the game finally released here in the United States, I think sometime late in 1993, right? Let's see, I'll look this up as I'm talking. But people were noticing that it had a different soundtrack on it. And so the soundtrack, it was, so the one that people were hearing that people were really raving about originally was, okay, so the game came out on September 23rd of 1993. But the soundtrack that people were really raving about was done by it had kind of like a techno and house soundtrack. Looks like it was composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata. And so it was really great, like kind of house techno-ish music and all that, and people really seemed to love it. But like I said, right when it came out here in the United States, it was different. And so here in the United States, it was Spencer Nielsen, who he had already been composing some other games on the for the Sega Genesis and CD, but also looks like a David Young and a Mark Crew. Um, and so it was kind of a big deal because people didn't really seem to like that they changed the soundtrack to it. Um, and so when I played the Sega CD version, right? Obviously, I played the United States, the American one. I remember reading about that, right? And so I'm playing the Sega CD version, when it first came out because we bought that game, and so I think that's why it's my favorite Sonic game because it was the one that we actually bought and I played and poured hours and hours into. But listening to the music, I'm like, this is actually pretty good music. Like, what? I was like, I guess I'm a little confused that this is the bad soundtrack. Like, what is the Japanese one soundtrack? So the Japanese soundtrack on Sonic City was always like this mythical unicorn, right? Because again, back then, trying to play an import game, unless you had the money to import a game and in the system and all that, it just wasn't something you really knew about. And we didn't have like things like YouTube or the internet wasn't what it is now and all that. So it was always like this very mythological thing, right? And so I'm thinking, what does that soundtrack sound like? Is it really that much better? Um, and so now, when I look back, right now that I've been able to play the Sonic CD version with the Japanese soundtrack, I mean, my personal opinion on it is that the Japanese one is it's great. I mean, it sounds cool and all, but I think I prefer the US one actually on it. And maybe it's just nostalgia because that's what I grew up with and all that. Um, but uh, um, but that's just my feeling of it now. Again, I was reading Game Fan at the time, and so just to kind of give a little bit of information here that just came across it here on this Wikipedia page that I just Googled really quick. So it says, so critics were divided. Excuse me. Critics were divided over the change of the soundtrack in the North American version of version. Game Fan, which had given the Japanese version of Sonic City a score of 100%, lambasted the change. Game Fan editor Dave Halverson called the change an atrocity that remains the biggest injustice in localization history. The reviewer of Games Radar said he shut his GameCube off in disgust when he realized Sonic Gems collection used a North American soundtrack. Nielsen said the criticism was blown out of proportion as if they replaced the music for Star Wars after the movie had been out for a while. Let's see. I'm trying to see like what exactly I guess was the reason for that. Because I don't know why they changed the music. I don't think I've been able to come across. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Let's see again. I'm just kind of doing like a really quick search here. Um, let's see. Music. Okay. Okay, here we go. So let me just read this real quick because I'm kind of curious now. So the Sonic City soundtrack was composed by Naofumo Hataya and Masafumi Ogata. According to Hataya, Sega allocated a large audio budget to showcase the audio functionality of the Sega CD, aiming for CD quality music superior to video game music of the time. The team worked with the Japanese music production company Bean and enlisted Keiko Otoku to provide vocals. The music was recorded in the Bean Studios. Hataya and Ogata's first demo songs were rejected by Oshima, who wanted a more bold experimental sound. They instead composed music inspired by the increasing popularity of house and techno in Japan, citing inspiration from acts like CNC Music Factory, Frankie Knuckles, and the KLF. Well, CNC Music Factory and the KLF, I remember listening to them back in the 90s. But they were also inspired by the popularity of Sonic in British DJ culture at the time. The team composed music to match the past, present, and future versions of each stage. While most tracks use CD audio, the past stages use sample-based PCM tracks to evoke a prehistoric feeling. Oh, okay. Because I do remember that I was like, oh, this music kind of sounds like Genesis music almost. But okay. An album of remixes by Hataya and Ogata was released in Japan in late 1994. Okay, so Sega of America delayed the North American release of Sonic City for 2 months to have a new soundtrack composed by Spencer Nielsen, David Young, and Mark Crew, credited as Sterling. Nielsen said Sega of America wanted something a little more musically rich and complex, with a theme they could use in marketing. The new theme song, Sonic Boom, was composed by Nielsen and performed by the female vocal trio Pastiche. Den of Geek described the American soundtracks as more orchestral and rocking, a bit more epic and almost mournful, with a sense of dread compared to the bouncy and joyful Japanese soundtrack. Nielsen said the two soundtracks represented completely different musical philosophies and approaches. Okay. So, okay, I guess that's what we have regarding that there. And yeah, they're both great. I mean, I'm glad that in the new versions now, right, you can select between the two so you can make, you can decide for yourselves. What I do think though is that, so again, if you can go into the past, the present and the future in this game, and the music from the present and the future and like the boss soundtrack and the vocal soundtrack, um it's all different on each version, right? But the songs from the past, I believe they're the same on both. Because those are the ones that were done PCM, which is, music that was done within the hardware as opposed to off of the CD. And so, but I think those were the past soundtracks were the same. But regardless of whatever the case, right, and all, either way, they both have really great soundtracks, whichever version you choose. So in the newer versions, you get two excellent soundtracks, right? So so it's kind of a big deal. But yeah, I just remember that it was such a big deal back then, and one of the bigger, Sega controversies back then was the soundtrack of Sonic CD. But I got a kick out of it though when I first got to play one of the more modern versions that came out of Sonic City. That I finally got to listen to the Japanese soundtrack, because after years and years of like thinking what it was, I was like, oh, okay, so this is what it is, and it's good. Like I said, I like it fine enough, but I tend to usually play it more with the American soundtrack. But maybe next time I give that game a go, I'll use the Japanese one, because I've only beaten the game once with the Japanese soundtrack, so I'm kind of forgetting what the music was all about. But the Sonic Boom song, as cheesy as it is, it's still super catchy, and I think that's part of the reason why I prefer that soundtrack, the US one, more. But like I said, you can choose whichever one you want the most now, since we have the option. Let's see. But then there was also, speaking of music, so there was the Terminator on the Sega CD also. That was a pretty well done game. I don't know if the one on the Genesis came out this year also, but the Terminator on the Sega CD came out in 1993, and it's a different game than the Genesis version. It's longer, more levels, more detail and all that. And it's a pretty fun action running gun kind of game. So, if you're a big fan of the Terminator movies, I'd definitely check out this game. It's probably one of the better Terminator games during this generation here. On a side note, if you're a fan of the Terminator, like me, I adore the Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. They're some of my favorite action sci-fi movies of all time. So if you're a big fan of those movies, maybe not so much like the later ones, right? But, okay, actually on that note, if you're a big fan of the first two Terminator movies and you were disappointed by Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, it's not bad. It's worth watching for the ending, because I think they got the ending really right. And everything else is not bad. But the end of the other ones, I know, yeah, they're not the best. But if you were disappointed by those and you really wanted like another true sequel to Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, I recommend you play, if you haven't already, Terminator, what's it called? Resistance, which is like on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and then it has their enhanced editions on the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. Because for me, that game, I played it like fairly recently, like 2 years ago or so. And it was a game that didn't get the best reviews, but like fans and all really liked the game. And so I checked it out, like, what is this game all about? And the game, it's a first-person shooter. It has some immersive sim first-person shooter elements to it. Like, it's not just shooting, right, and all. Like, you can explore things, solve puzzles and whatnot. But it's not too complex on that and all. But it's a fun enough shooter. And it looks pretty decent too, also, especially the enhanced edition. But the story to it and all, it's what Terminator 3 really should have been like. And so if you really enjoyed the first two games, I definitely give this game a go, because I feel like you will not be disappointed by it, if anything, just for the story on it. And the gameplay is it's very serviceable. It's very fun. So yeah, definitely evokes the feelings of those first two games. And part of what is really aided by that is that it has a soundtrack also from, what's his name? Brad Fidel, I think, who did the amazing score for the first two Terminator movies. So anyways, a little bit of a side note, but just thought I'd get that out there. But speaking of music, though, so the music was done by Tommy Tallarico. So he was a composer that was starting to get some fame back then, also too, for just making really excellent soundtracks. But I saw this thing, and I was half asleep when I saw it, so I just kind of jotted this down really quick for myself. Maybe something I can do a little bit more research into. But there seems to be some kind of a controversy with this Tommy Tallarico dude. So he was a composer back in these days, and he was known for making some really quality soundtracks. So, like right off the top of my head, so he did the soundtrack for Terminator CD, which it doesn't sound like anything like a Terminator soundtrack. So it's not like reminiscent of like what Brad Fiedel did for the movies. But he did, but it's good. I mean, it's cool music. It's like kind of like combination of like kind of rock and music and all, but it sounds pretty good. He also did the music for the Earthworm Jim games, which we'll talk about in the later years. He did a really excellent soundtrack for Skeleton Warriors. And also this game called Wild 9 that came out on the PlayStation. The game's okay, but it had a really good soundtrack on it. And so anyway, so he was known to be a pretty good composer. But there seems to be some kind of a controversy around this dude because I saw something that is like, did he do the music for Sega CD? So I like maybe he didn't. So I don't know. I'll have to look it up. If anybody knows more about it, feel free to let me know. But yeah, it seems to be some kind of controversy around this dude. But assuming he did do the music for these games, if then it's pretty good sounding music. He eventually did a little show for the what was it called, G4 TV, where he was on with the Electric Underground, I think it was called, with him and Victor Lewis, or Victor Lucas, I think is his name, Victor Lucas. Victor still does some. He still has a show going on YouTube, and so yeah, his shows are pretty good as far as like video game reviews and things like that. And it's always cool to see one of the OGs from back in those days, right, still doing his thing on YouTube. But anyways, some of the older episodes from back in the day and all, it was this Victor Lucas dude with this Tommy Tallarico guy. But anyways, another great game that was on the Sega CD was Sylphied. And so Sylphied was, so Nintendo had Star Fox, which again, you already gave the praise on that game in there and all for what it did for the video game industry and Nintendo and all that. But Sega had Sylphied. Granted on the Sega CD, right? So it's a bit kind of cheating, right? But Sylphied, it was a true spectacle of a game back then, where it was really showing us what video game graphics could be as far as like not only 3D technology, but also like the scope and the set pieces and everything, because some of the things that you do in this game and all, I mean, it's pretty amazing, from like stage 2 where all these asteroids are coming at you and all. And I think stage 3 where it has almost like a scene from like the Death Star, right? Where you're going through like these trenches on like a kind of like a, like a spaceship of some sort, and all. And it was truly impressive, right? And Sylphied's still one of my favorite shoot 'em ups of all time. They did some trickery on the Sega CD to make you believe that it was all running in real time, which I believe it wasn't, but it looks very convincing. And however they did the graphics on this game, it truly is stunning, and it still looks pretty amazing, right? And all back from from a game from 1993. So you can only imagine how much it blew our minds back then. But Sylphied, definitely one of the better reasons to own a Sega CD, in my opinion. But speaking of that, also on the Sega CD, so in one of the games that was one of the things that the Sega CD was starting to get some kind of popularity on was because of RPGs. A lot of them, though, were only in Japan, though. And again, that was kind of the theme back then, especially for Sega, where a lot of RPGs just weren't coming out here in the States. It was, they just, they took a lot to localize. It was kind of a very niche genre here in the States at the time. So a lot of companies didn't really want to put the effort on it. But they had been talking about this game, Lunar, the Silver Star story, that had come out in Japan. That was a really amazing game. It had a really beautiful story. It was kind of like Sega's answer to the Final Fantasy series in terms of like the scope of the story and all that. And had an amazing soundtrack too. And so, but it looked like for a while it didn't seem like the game would come out here in the United States. Well, eventually it did, and it came out in late 1993, because I think it came out in Japan in 1992, came out in the States late 1993, and it was localized by this company called Working Designs.
So Working Designs, they specialize in localizing games over to the United States here, specifically kind of more Japanese RPGs and all, and or more niche kind of games like that. And they were also known for a couple of things. One of them being that the packaging to their games, they really went all out because like they would do like almost use like this tin foil sort of like look very glossy and all material that they would use like on the instruction manuals, really quality paper, everything in I believe everything in color, or if not just everything looked, had a lot of like the original artwork of the Japanese version, because that was kind of a big deal because so many games up to this point, they had really beautiful artwork in Japan, using like assets from the actual game itself and the artist, right? Which a lot of times had kind of a bit of an anime look to him and all, where they would bring him over here to the States and, it would just look different. One of an early example of that is I talked about it, I think in a previous episode, but was in Mega Man, where the box art to Mega Man in Japan, he was known over there, Rockman, it looked very reminiscent of what you would see in the game, right? And had a very anime look to it and all. But then here in the United States, it was a bit of a travesty. And so you started seeing that a lot. Now, there are some scenarios where I do prefer the American box art, but in a lot of cases, it wasn't, the Japanese one was a lot better. And so one thing that this company did, right, is that it was really trying to not only bring over that artwork from Japan, but also more specifically, really preserve it in a really fancy way. So when you look at like their packaging and all, I mean, they're really just highlighting the best in the best way, right? The artwork of the game. And Lunar had really beautiful artwork, like the character designs and all. And so it was kind of cool that they were able to preserve all that. And then also they used to include like some extras. Like I don't know if with this version of Lunar, maybe it was in the one that came out on the PlayStation later, but I know there was like a galleon puppet, but no, I think that's on the PlayStation one. Never mind. But like the packaging on this one on the Sega CD, again with the instruction manual, it looked really beautiful and all. And then the CD itself, right, has some really beautiful artwork that was actually from the game, right? Not like a different artist interpretation of it, right? Not only a different artist, but also from a different culture. So it was kind of cool that they were able to preserve the original artwork on there. And so that's one of the things that they were known for. But another thing they were known for too is also their localization style. And so by that I mean is that, so the game so this is a good example here of one, right? For Lunar is the game was written by Japanese writers and all. And so the story of Lunar is fairly lighthearted. It's a very charming adventure. I mean, I absolutely love this game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And the story to it is just very simple, but very charming and very heroic and all. It almost has like a bit of a Disney quality to it. And by Disney, I mean like the old Disney, right? Where simple story, but has really good themes to it, really good story, and something that everyone can get into and all, very heroic kind of elements to it. But what Working Designs would do is that they would translate the story, and the good thing about it was that they had some professional localization writers, or whatever they're called, where basically meaning that sometimes, in the past, there was a lot of like mistranslations and all that, in games. And so sometimes you're reading something, you're like, am I reading that right? And it's like, no, you are reading it right. It's just that, the budget to try to localize games back then isn't what it is now. And so a lot of times games just sort of suffered for that. But Working Designs, they had professional writers that could translate the things accurately over, which was cool because you weren't really seeing like misspellings or grammar issues and all that. But sometimes they took a little bit too much liberty, though, as far as like how they would not necessarily change the story, but just infuse like American pop culture references and things. So, for example, like you're playing this, Lunar is a very fantasy game that's set place in a completely different world, in a kind of like anime medieval sort of setting to it, right? So when you hear references to like Wheaties, or I think even something from like Beavis and Butthead and Bill Clinton at the time, right? It's a little off-putting, I mean, yeah, sure, it could be a little bit funny, especially for, American audiences and all. But it is, especially nowadays when you play it right and all, because a lot of those references are outdated and everything. And so it just kind of feels off when, again, you're playing a game that takes place in a fantasy, in another world, another imaginary world. But
Anyways, just one thing about this company though, what they would do, but at the very least, right, they should definitely deserve a lot of praise for them, translating the games over the way they would, and because they brought over games that otherwise we might have not seen. And we'll touch more base on them. I feel like in the years to come, right, and on some other projects that they worked on. The main dude was Victor Ireland, I think, for this company, and so they would also put like there was a lot of like videos of behind the scenes stuff that they would include in their games, and I always thought that was kind of cool, right? Because I know back then we didn't really have access to those kind of things, so I definitely appreciate like the extras that they would put into their games. But yeah, Lunar, an amazing game. I didn't get it played until I think 1995 when a buddy of mine that actually had the Sega CD let us borrow it. But love the game, absolutely amazing, and one of the best experiences I've had playing a video game, especially for what I was going through at the time. Right, and all when I played it, it was just something that helped me get through over a hard time, and so that's why I hold this game very dear in my memory. Um, but Sega, right? A lot of cool stuff, and I'm sure there's other games that I'm missing there. Those are just some games that I wanted to touch base on, and that I felt like Sega was really kicking ass during this time here. But on other CD related games, we did get Castlevania Rondo of Blood this year. Well, I should say in Japan only though, but it did come out in 1993, and it ended up being one of the best Castlevania of the 2D games that are more action oriented. But it did have some adventure elements where you have multiple paths that you can explore and all in its stage, so it gives it some replayability value. So yeah, great game, and because it is on CD, it also has CD quality music, and so really good for that there. And if it's also the prequel to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is we'll talk about that game when the time comes, but definitely a really cool game, and definitely I would recommend playing that game because you can get it now on the PlayStation 4 on the has like Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night on it. But then some other games that came out during the stretch here is so some PC games too. Also, they were kind of carving their own niche of a gaming audience. And so, for example, like we had a game like there was Doom, which was monumental, right? And all in as far as like creating this, well, not creating the genre of first person shooters, but really pushing it forward. We had Castle Wolfenstein 3D last year, but then this year Doom, and Doom really blew up in so many ways where it was at the time, right, a really good first person shooter, really fun, but then also the way it was distributed. So my understanding is that the game was distributed like online, something like that, where it was like getting like word of mouth or so, and so they use like this different kind of like sales tactics to try to distribute the game online, something to that effect. Again, I don't know the full story of it, so I don't want to go too much more into that if I don't know what I'm talking about exactly. But basically, it was also revolutionary for that too, also, and the game just became a huge hit and was monstrous as far as like how it pushed because first person shooters became huge here, specifically more so in the United States, and this is sort of like the Godfather of it, right, where it was just highly popular. And also probably another game too, also, I mean, they didn't really mention it, but that also was causing some concern for violence in video games and all that, because I know it was later years, right, with some of the things that eventually ended up happening, unfortunately, in real life, but where Doom was being blamed for it. But it was just huge in its influence across the video game industry. And for me personally, I mean, I've played Doom. I've never beaten the game and all, and it's a very fun game. I love it. But yeah, I've never actually beaten. I need to beat Doom at some point. It's just I can say I beat this game. I mean, this game's a damn classic. It's like I need to beat it. But yeah, it was just highly monumental for the video game industry in so many ways, not just the game itself, but also like the way it was distributed, the word of mouth behind it, I guess behind the scenes stuff and all amongst the developers on how to develop games and all that. It was, things along those lines is why it was just really, really a big deal. But then we also had a game like Myst and Day of the Tentacles. So these are two games that are kind of more like a point and click kind of adventure games, which were pretty popular on the PC. And these two were very popular during this time. And some of the more higher rated games, I believe, of the year too. Also, I'm not too familiar with either one of them. I've heard Day of the Tentacle is really fun to play through. It's just a very, I want to say, I think it's by Tim Schafer. If it is, he's also the dude that did Psychonauts and Brutal Legends. He has a very kind of quirky sense of humor and all that. But if it's anything like those games, as far as like the story, characters, and all that, then yeah, I'm sure I would actually have a lot of fun with that game. So maybe at some point I'll try to check that game out. But I know that they were really popular though, right? For those reasons. Um, and then, but in the arcade though, we had some big things happening too, where we had so SNK. So they've been. I've talked before how they've been trying to go after like the success of Street Fighter 2, and they never really could. But they definitely made some really popular and fun fighting games. So like Fatal Fury, um, World Heroes, Art of Fighting, and the King of Fighters. I think that came out later. I think it did, because the first one was King of Fighter '94. So I mean, I know it says '94 and should have come in '94, but sometimes whatever the year is, it actually came out the year before. But I don't think it came out in 1993. I think it actually came out in 1994. So I don't think it's like sports games that do that. But they had Samurai Showdown, and Samurai Showdown was probably known as one of the biggest competitors for Street Fighter 2 as far as like quality. And it is. I mean, Samurai Showdown is a really great game. It's different than Street Fighter 2 in that it's a weapon-based fighting game. So definitely plays different, but it was really just a great fighting game and definitely stood on its own 2 feet in its unique identity. And it's super fun, really cool characters. And yeah, definitely it became a hit on its own. Again, not quite to the level of Street Fighter 2, but I mean, it spawned a lot of sequels and still, has more recently had a somewhat recent game that came out. And so it's just a big name in the video game fighting world. And rightly so. I mean, it's a blast to play through. I love that game. It's really fun. And some of the versions that came out later, specifically the sequel, part 2 was just, continue to improve on it. But yeah, great game, bro. Samurai Showdown. And then there was also the NBA Jam, which really popular arcade game. Continued on with using like digitized style graphics, like the way Mortal Kombat was. There's this documentary on YouTube that I saw that talks about like the making of these games. So like Narc, NBA Jam, Mortal Kombat, and also I'm kind of curious to like how they did that, like Pit Fighter also. But yeah, NBA Jam is a blast. I'm not the biggest basketball fan, like the actual sport. I kind of was back in the day, mainly because of Michael Jordan and also the Portland Trailblazers and Clyde Drexler and all. But then it was just like that stretch, and then that was it. I'm not too big on basketball, but I did like playing some basketball video games. Like I was a big fan of like the Lakers versus Celtics, Bulls versus Blazers, and the NBA Live games from the Genesis days, and then NBA Jam also, because it's just a hell of a fun game to play, even if you're not into sports games. And yeah, this is when the arcade version came out. Again, the Genesis and Super Nintendo versions I think came out in the following year. But yeah, NBA Jam was just a bit just hella fun to play. If you haven't played it for some reason, it's just you'll have a fun time, especially multiplayer on this one. But probably one of the biggest arcade games though that came out this year was Mortal Kombat 2 in the arcades. And so where Bigger and Better is the name of the game on this one. So now we're in a different setting where the first one takes place on Earth. This one takes place in what is it, the Outworld or Netherworld or whatever it's called. And so that gives the backdrops to have more of a darker like themes to them. So, for example, like the very first stage that you usually start off in is you're kind of like in this dungeon-looking area with an acid pool in the back and all. So, and then you're like in this forest with like these monstrous-looking trees and things along those lines and all that, right? So, definitely made the game feel darker, and it was just overall better. More characters, more fatalities, more. I think this is where they started introducing. Babalities, I think. I'm not quite sure on that, but it had just more stuff that you can do instead of just one fatality per character, and just overall better. But the arcade version is hella hard, though. It's that's one thing I don't like about Mortal Kombat is that I feel like the AI is it's very unfair, or maybe I just suck at these games, but that's just the feeling I get. Like when I play the arcade version, I'm like, okay, cool. I can't land this move. Like I'm trying to freeze a character and all, and it's like they keep ducking over it or jumping over it. And it's like it doesn't really. I don't know. I feel like the AI on it is broken. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just what I feel like. But either way, Mortal Kombat 2 was huge, though, and mainly because of the multiplayer, obviously, right? And yeah, I mean, it was very cool, better graphics and all that, and so it was funny because as much as Mortal Kombat was trying to start controversy with the home version and all, here's another one, in the arcades in part 2, bigger, better, and bloodier and all that. So it was great. But yeah, cool game though. Um, but we're also, like I said, 32-bit is starting to, come out now. So we have the FM Towns Marty, the Amiga CD32, which I mentioned earlier on this segment here, and I don't have a whole lot of information on those two. I just know that they were out in Japan. Well, the Amiga 32, was it in Japan only? I don't recall. Maybe in Europe. I'm not sure. But the FM Towns Marty, I know, was in Japan only. But then we got the 3DO and the Jaguar. So those systems came out towards the end of 1993. Like, I want to say October, November-ish or so. One or the other came out during that stretch there. And so the 3DO was a 32-bit system, a CD-ROM based 32-bit system, and then the Jaguar was a quote unquote 64-bit system that was cartridge based. And so both of them, right at this point, at the end of 1993, they definitely had some hype behind them because it was, we're still in the midst of like 16-bit, and 16-bit was starting to do some cool stuff. But like the jump from like 16-bit to 32-bit slash 64-bit was a huge leap, and still for me the biggest leap in gaming, because we went from predominantly 2D based games to now more predominantly 3D based games. And even though the early stretch of 3D based games, when you go back to it, can be a bit rough, it is still a big jump though for me. I still feel that was the biggest jump that we had in gaming. Debatably also the next generation, right, from the fifth to the sixth. But for me personally, I feel like from the fourth to the fifth generation was the biggest one. And so when we were looking at screenshots from like the 3DO and the Jaguar and all, I mean, it was truly mind blowing. Like, I'll never forget seeing the screenshots from the game Total Eclipse from Crystal Dynamics, where it has like this picture of like this volcano looking monster thing coming out from the ground of some like alien planet. And again, I'm just talking about the screenshot, right? And I mean, that looked just amazing, far beyond what we were already playing. Or also screenshots of like Alien versus Predator, and then they would show a screenshot of like that face hugger right up on the screen, and it looked like with no pixelization or anything and all. Again, whether that actually made it in the game or not, like that, I don't know. But I'm talking about the screenshots that they were showing, and so it was truly mind blowing. And so these systems again came out later towards the end of this year. And the launches on them weren't the best, admittedly, right? Like we had Crash and Burn on the 3DO, and I think that was it for a while. I think Madden 94 or the Madden game didn't come out until a little bit later, which had some hype behind it, and Road Rash, which also had some hype behind it. I think it was also 1994 when it came out, but I think it was just Crash and Burn for a while on the 3DO, and then on the Jaguar. I mean, what did it have? That Cybermorph game. Which, if you want to hear something funny on Cybermorph, well, two things. The angry video game nerd, his video on it is pretty funny, but also read the Game Fan review for Cybermorph. So this game, if you play it, it's available on the Atari compilation that they came out fairly recently. It's pretty basic, it's pretty rough, and all. It's like it's okay, I guess, Now if you take yourself back to that time frame when it came out, but they rave about this game like it is the best thing ever. And it's funny because if the stories are believed to be true, they wrote that review when I guess they were like on LSD. I guess whoever wrote the game or wrote the review on that. But anyways, if you look up just Google stuff like that and all, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's kind of funny. But the initial batch of games wasn't too impressive. I think it was just more the prospect of what these systems could do that had some hype behind it in this particular moment right now, right? So yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like it was too long ago when the 16-bit systems came out, and here we are, right around on the cusp of getting all this 32-bit stuff and 64-bit stuff coming out. So, so that was pretty cool. And then we're also, starting to hear rumblings of a Project Reality of a Sega system also that was 32-bit, and I think there were some rumblings about a PlayStation system too. So, wonder what those will bring, right? But in the arcades, though, also in Japan, this was in late 1993. I didn't know they were out this early already. But Virtual Fighter, which was running on the Model 1 arcade board, which was also ran virtual racing. And this was the first true polygonal fighter, I believe, at least to this magnitude. And it was pretty impressive because the graphics were pretty impressive at the time, right? And all that, it was all running in real-time 3D polygons, but then also the smooth playability of it as well too was also pretty impressive. And
So it was just like, because 3D games originally were a bit rough to control, but Virtual Fighter, I mean, I would think that it was one of the first 3D games that you can play that felt smooth. The controls felt responsive and all. Um, I mean, maybe not the first, right, and all, but I think to what when it was like this magnitude of graphics and all, right, I guess I should say. Um, but um, but either way, it was pretty impressive. I'm sure what people were seeing in Japan, right, in the arcades. Um, and also another one too that came out, and I didn't know it came out this early. Also, was a Ridge Racer in the arcades. So let's see, Virtua Fighter. So it ran on the Model One arcade board. Ridge Racer, I want to say, was it the System 22? I think is what their arcade board was called that ran Ridge Racer. I'm not sure, but basically in Japan it kind of started, and eventually it would spill over to the home consoles in the next generation. Sega and Namco were leading the way as far as like or I should say two of the companies that were kind of leading the way as far as like high fidelity graphics, right? With a lot of like games that they were having, like fighters and racing games and all, where it gave them the opportunity to really try to flesh out their graphics and all, to make them look really nice and run at smooth frame rates and all that, because it's not really dealing with like other complex things like platforming gameplay or RPGs or things like that, right? And I was where they it was more like a showpiece and all, right, for their games. Because again, it's just a fighting game or a racing game. Now those games have a lot of depth and all, just in ways that I feel like they were able to also focus a lot on the graphics on it and all. And I mean, yeah, I can imagine like Virtual Fighter and Ridge Racer at this time in 1993 were really impressive to look at. And yeah, I mean, they were starting off as early as this, so I thought that was pretty impressive. I didn't know that. But another game too, also that came out this year. It came out in September, I think I read, in 1993, but was a Super Street Fighter 2. And so, I mean, this was a pretty big year for fighting games then, because we had the home ports of Street Fighter 2, the updated home ports that came out this year, Samurai Showdown, Mortal Kombat 2, and Super Street Fighter 2, and Virtual Fighter. I mean, those are all kind of big names, right, for this time frame. But Super Street Fighter 2 was basically technically still Street Fighter 2, obviously, right? But it's called Super now, and it earned that name because now you get four new characters: T-Hawk, Cammy, DJ, and Fei Long. So Cammy's like a more agile fighter. She's like a Britain or like a British secret spy or something like that. So she's really fast and has a lot of like cool like quick moves that she can do. T-Hawk is more of a wrestler kind of character, and he's Native American, but he's in Mexico though. Um, and he has like a really cool like move where he'll grab you, kind of spin you in the air, and then slam you down face first on the or grab you by the face and slam you down on the ground. He's kind of hard to use though. I have a hard time using that character, but he's pretty powerful though. And then there's DJ, who has like charge moves, so like Guile. So you hold back and forward on a lot of his moves, and he's a Jamaican kickboxer, and he's pretty cool. He's kind of fast and all, and has some pretty cool moves. And then there's Fei Long, who he's very much a Bruce Lee inspired character, and he has like he's really quick too. Also, and has like a punch combination move that you can do, and also like a flying kick also. But yeah, and then some of the older characters have like new moves, new animations. The backgrounds are redrawn to look a little bit more detailed. The character portraits also are redrawn, and then the really cool intro too, where it has Ryu looking all muscular like and all, and he's kind of bouncing up and down as he's getting ready to charge up his fireball, and he shoots it at the screen and all. I mean, that was pretty intense to look at back then. Um, but yeah, definitely a great addition to the Street Fighter 2 family there. And yeah, came out this year too. So overall, I mean, I'm pretty much done now. Yeah, this almost went to 3 hours, and so I figured I'd have a lot to say on this, because a lot of this stuff is where I was really getting into video games during this stretch here, right? Like reading magazines and all that, and so I also have a lot of more personal input to give on these here, and just again, I just tend to have more knowledge during this time stretch going forward. And so hopefully I'll be able to provide, more in detail information like this, right? And, from here on out, as I was doing the research for this and all, I was like, just like all these memories are coming back on just all of the stuff I used to geek out back then. And apparently, still now too, also. And I'm sure I missed probably a lot of cool stuff that came out during this year. Like I said, I just kind of jotted down some of the main highlights from what I could go through here. But yeah, but that's all I got for this one.
hope you have an excellent week, and I will see you in the next one here where we go into 1994. Have a great one.